Hello, friends. Did you know nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy these stories, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps. Thank you for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. My name's Roy Hutchins, and I've been pulling 18-wheelers across these American highways for the better part of 22 years now. Started when I was 26, fresh out of a failed marriage and looking for something that would keep me moving. Trucking seemed like the perfect escape. Just me, the road, and whatever cargo needed hauling from point A to point B. In all those years, I've seen my share of strange things. Desert mirages that look like lakes. Fog so thick you can't see your own hood. Storms that come out of nowhere and try to flip your rig sideways. But what happened to me on Interstate 80 through Nevada back in October of 2019? Well, that's something I still can't fully wrap my head around, even now. I was hauling a load of furniture from a warehouse in Sacramento, California, bound for a distribution center outside Salt Lake City, Utah. Standard run, nothing special. The pay was decent enough, about $1,400 for the round trip, and I knew the route like the back of my hand. I-80 through Nevada is mostly straight desert highway, the kind where you can set your cruise control and let your mind wander for hours. The trouble started around mile marker 347, just east of a little town called Battle Mountain. If you've never driven through that stretch of Nevada, picture this. Endless sagebrush desert stretching out in every direction, mountains rising up like purple teeth against the horizon, and a ribbon of asphalt that seems to go on forever. During the day, it's beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. At night, though, it becomes something else entirely. I'd made this run probably 50 times over the years, always during daylight hours. But this particular trip got delayed when my trailer's air brakes started acting up back in Sacramento. Took the repair shop 6 hours longer than they'd promised to get the parts in and fix the problem. By the time I rolled out of their lot, the sun was already setting, painting the Sierra Nevada mountains blood red in my rearview mirrors. Now, most truckers will tell you that driving at night isn't necessarily a bad thing. Less traffic, cooler temperatures for your engine, and if you know the road well enough, you can make good time. The problem comes when you hit stretches of highway where there's absolutely nothing. No towns, no truck stops, no other vehicles for company. Just you and the darkness, with your headlights carving a small tunnel of light through the black. That's exactly what I was dealing with as I crossed into Nevada around 11:30 p.m. The temperature had dropped to about 45 degrees, typical for October in the high desert. My CB radio was mostly quiet, just the occasional chatter from other drivers still on the road, discussing weather conditions or comparing fuel prices at various truck stops. I remember reaching for my thermos of coffee around midnight, thinking I had maybe 6 more hours of driving ahead of me if I pushed straight through to Salt Lake City. The caffeine was still working, and I felt alert enough to keep going. My rig, a 2016 Kenworth T680, was running smooth, all gauges showing normal readings. Everything seemed routine. That's when I first saw her. It was just past mile marker 350, right where the highway curves slightly to avoid a small hill covered in Joshua trees. My headlights swept across the desert as I took the curve. And there she was, a figure in white, standing maybe 30 yards off the shoulder of the road. At first, I thought it might be someone whose car had broken down. Maybe they were trying to flag down help. But as my truck got closer and my headlights illuminated the figure more clearly, I could see that wasn't the case at all. It was a woman, or at least it appeared to be. She was wearing what looked like a long white dress or gown that seemed to flow and move even though there wasn't any wind that I could feel. Her hair was long and dark, hanging down past her shoulders. But here's the thing that immediately struck me as wrong. She wasn't waving for help or showing any signs of distress. She was just standing there, perfectly still, facing the highway, facing me. I slowed down instinctively, not because I was planning to stop, but because something about the whole scene felt off. As my truck passed by her position, I got a clear look at her face through my side window. What I saw made my blood run cold. She was pale, not just regular pale, but an almost translucent white that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. Her eyes were completely black, like looking into empty sockets, and she was smiling. Not a friendly smile, but something twisted and wrong that made every instinct in my body scream, "Get away from here!" But the most disturbing part was what happened as I passed by. She turned her head to follow my truck, that horrible smile never leaving her face, and then she started walking toward the highway. Not running, not stumbling, walking with a purpose, as if she intended to step right out in front of my rig. I punched the accelerator, pushing my speed up from 65 to 75 miles per hour. In my side mirror, I could see her white figure growing smaller, but she was still moving toward the road. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel tighter. What the hell was that? I muttered to myself, my voice sounding strange in the quiet cab of my truck. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just someone playing a prank, dressed up in white clothes for some reason. Maybe it was a mannequin or a scarecrow that someone had set up as a joke. Desert people are known for their odd sense of humor sometimes. But even as I told myself these things, I knew they didn't explain what I'd seen. The way she'd moved, the way she'd tracked my truck with her gaze, that wasn't a mannequin. My CB radio crackled to life, startling me so badly I nearly swerved into the median. "Eastbound Kenworth at mile marker 350, came a gravelly voice through the static. "You see her too?" I grabbed my radio handset with one shaking hand. Come back on that. Who's asking?" "This is Dale, westbound about 5 miles ahead of you. Been driving this route for 15 years, and I see her every time I come through here after midnight. White dress, standing in the desert. You saw her, didn't you?" My mouth went dry. Yeah, I saw something. Who is she?" There was a long pause filled with static. When Dale's voice came back, it was quieter, more serious. "Nobody knows for sure. Story goes that back in the 80s, a woman's car broke down out here. She started walking for help, wearing her white wedding dress. They found her body 3 days later, about a mile from where you just passed. Died of exposure." "But that's just a story, right?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer. "Maybe, maybe not. All I know is she shows up on this stretch of road, always around mile marker 350, always after midnight. And driver, if I were you, I'd keep my speed up and my doors locked. Because sometimes she doesn't just watch trucks go by." "What do you mean?" Another pause. "Sometimes she tries to get in." The radio went silent except for the soft hiss of static. I tried calling back to Dale several times, but got no response. Either he'd switched channels or moved out of range. I looked at my speedometer and realized I was doing 85 miles per hour now, my foot having unconsciously pressed harder on the accelerator during the radio conversation. My knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel so tight. "Get it together, Roy," I told myself. "It's just some local legend. People love making up ghost stories about lonely stretches of highway." But even as I said it, I couldn't shake the image of that woman's face, the black eyes, the unnatural pallor, that twisted smile. And I couldn't forget how she'd started walking toward the road as if she'd been waiting specifically for my truck to come along. I decided to focus on driving and put the whole incident behind me. I had a schedule to keep and bills to pay. Whatever I'd seen back there, it was behind me now. That's what I thought anyway. About 20 miles down the road, just as I was starting to convince myself that it had all been some kind of hallucination brought on by too much caffeine and not enough sleep, I saw the white figure again. This time she was standing on the opposite side of the highway, the southbound side, maybe 20 yards from the road. But she was facing my direction, and as my headlights swept over her, I could see that same pale face and black eyes staring directly at me. I didn't slow down this time. If anything, I pressed harder on the accelerator, pushing my truck up to nearly 90 miles per hour. Through my side mirror, I watched her grow smaller and disappear into the darkness behind me. But I'd only gone maybe 10 more miles when I saw her a third time. Now she was back on the northbound side, my side of the highway, and she was closer to the road, close enough that I could see the details of her white dress, the way her dark hair moved as if blown by an unfelt wind. Close enough to see that horrible smile spread across her pale features as my truck approached. This time, as I passed by, she didn't just turn to watch me. She took several deliberate steps toward the highway as if she were timing her movement to intercept my truck. I yanked the steering wheel to the left, swerving partially into the median to avoid what felt like an inevitable collision. My trailer fishtailed slightly before I regained control, but I managed to keep the rig upright and on the road. In my mirrors, I could see her standing at the very edge of the pavement now, still wearing that twisted smile, her black eyes reflecting the red glow of my taillights. My CB radio crackled again. "Eastbound Kenworth, this is Frank running westbound about 2 miles ahead of you. You okay back there? Looked like you swerved pretty hard." I grabbed the radio. "Frank, do you see anything unusual out there? Any people walking around in white clothes?" "Negative on that, driver. Just empty road as far as I can see. You having equipment problems?" "No, Never mind. Thanks for checking." Frank's truck passed me going the opposite direction about a minute later, his headlights briefly illuminating my cab as we crossed paths. I gave him a wave and tried to look like everything was normal, but everything wasn't normal, not even close. I'd now seen the same woman, or the same apparition, or whatever the hell she was, 3 times in the span of 40 miles. Each time she'd been closer to the road. Each time she'd seemed more focused on my truck specifically. And each time, that smile had gotten wider. I thought about Dale's words on the CB radio. Sometimes she tries to get in. The idea sent a chill down my spine. I reached over and made sure my passenger door was locked. Then I checked the door to my sleeper berth. Both secure. But as I continued driving east through the Nevada desert, one question kept echoing in my mind. If she wanted to get in my truck, why was she always appearing outside when I could see her? What if the whole point of showing herself on the roadside was to distract me from what she was really doing? I glanced in my rearview mirror at the curtain that separated my cab from the sleeper berth, and for just a moment, I could have sworn I saw it move. But that was impossible. There was no wind in the cab, no reason for the curtain to move at all. I forced myself to focus on the road ahead, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer alone in my truck. The sensation was subtle at first, just a vague awareness that something had changed. The air in the cab felt different somehow, colder despite the fact that my heater was running. And underneath the steady rumble of my diesel engine, I thought I could hear something else. Something that sounded almost like breathing. Mile marker 400 flashed by in my headlights. I still had over 300 miles to go before reaching Salt Lake City, and the sun wouldn't start rising for at least another 5 hours. It was going to be a very long night. As I drove deeper into the Nevada darkness, trying to convince myself that my imagination was just playing tricks on me, I had no idea that the real horror was only just beginning. Because the woman in white wasn't content to just watch me pass by anymore. She was done waiting on the roadside, and she was about to make her presence known in a way that would change everything I thought I knew about the lonely highways I'd been traveling for more than 2 decades. The next time I saw her, she wouldn't be standing in the desert at all. she'd be much, much closer than that. The breathing sound behind the curtain was getting stronger. At first, I tried to tell myself it was just the air conditioning system cycling, or maybe some kind of pressure change in the cab, but as I listened more carefully, fighting to hear over the rumble of my diesel engine and the whisper of tires on asphalt, I had to admit the truth. It sounded exactly like someone taking slow, deliberate breaths just a few feet behind my seat. My hands started sweating on the steering wheel. Every few seconds, I'd glance up at the rearview mirror, trying to see past the curtain that separated my driving area from the sleeper berth. But the angle was wrong, and the cab was too dark. I couldn't make out anything unusual. The smart thing would have been to pull over immediately and check the back. Get out, walk around to the rear access door of my sleeper compartment, and prove to myself that there was nothing there. But something deep in my gut told me that stopping would be the worst possible thing I could do right now. Instead, I reached for my CB radio and switched to channel 19, the standard trucker frequency. Break 19, this is Roy eastbound on I-80 around mile marker 410. Any drivers out there familiar with this stretch of road? Static filled the cab for several long seconds. Then a voice came through, older and gravelly, with the kind of accent you hear in truck stops across the Southwest. Roy, this is Vernon westbound, about 30 miles ahead of you. I know that stretch pretty well. What's your 20 and what's the problem? I hesitated, not sure how to explain what was happening without sounding completely insane. Vernon, you ever hear stories about this part of Nevada? About anyone seeing unusual things after midnight? There was a pause. When Vernon's voice came back, it was more serious. Roy, you talking about the White Lady? The name sent a chill down my spine. Someone else mentioned her earlier. Woman in a white dress standing beside the road? That's her. Been haunting this highway for decades now. Where exactly did you see her? Mile marker 350, then again around 370 and 390. She's been getting closer to the road each time. Another pause, longer this time. Roy, listen to me very carefully. Do not stop your truck. Do not get out. Do not look in your mirrors more than you have to. Just keep driving east and get off this highway as soon as you can. Why? What aren't you telling me? Because seeing her 3 times in one night means she's locked onto you. And when the White Lady locks onto a driver, she doesn't give up until she gets what she wants. My mouth went dry. What does she want? A ride. The CB went silent except for static. I tried calling back to Vernon several times, but got no response. Either he'd switched channels or moved out of range. Behind me, the breathing sound continued. Slow, steady, patient. I pressed harder on the accelerator, pushing my truck up to 85 miles per hour. The speed felt dangerous on this dark stretch of highway, but staying here felt even more dangerous. My CB crackled to life again, but this time it was a different voice, younger, with a slight southern accent. Eastbound Kenworth running about mile marker 415. This is Blake westbound. You copy? I grabbed the handset. Blake, this is Roy. I copy. Roy, I gotta ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. You been seeing a woman in white out there tonight? My blood ran cold. How did you know that? Because I've been trying to reach you on the radio for the past 10 miles. Started picking up your CB signal around mile marker 420, but every time I tried to break in, all I could hear was this voice, a woman's voice, whispering your name over and over. I stared at the radio handset in my trembling hand. That's impossible. My radio's been working fine. I was just talking to another driver named Vernon. Roy, I've been monitoring channel 19 for the past hour. There ain't been nobody named Vernon on this frequency. Matter of fact, you're the only eastbound truck I've seen or heard from in the past 50 miles. The cab suddenly felt 20 degrees colder. I looked at my heater controls. They were set to 75 degrees, same as they'd been all night. But frost was starting to form on the inside edges of my windshield. "Blake, I need you to stay on the radio with me. Something's not right here." "I'm trying to, Roy, but your signal keeps cutting in and out." "Sometimes it sounds like you're talking, but sometimes it sounds like someone else entirely. Someone whispering." The breathing behind the curtain stopped. In the sudden silence, I could hear something else, a soft rustling sound, like fabric moving against the walls of my sleeper berth. "Blake, are you still there?" Static. I tried switching to different channels, desperate to reach another driver, anyone who could confirm that what was happening to me was real, but every frequency was either dead silent or filled with white noise. That's when I noticed something in my peripheral vision. The passenger seat, which had been empty for the entire trip, now had a depression in the cushion, as if someone invisible was sitting there. I jerked the steering wheel to the right, my truck swerving toward the shoulder before I regained control. In that brief moment when my headlights swept across the desert, I saw her again, the woman in white. But this time, she wasn't standing still. She was running parallel to my truck, matching my speed perfectly, her white dress flowing behind her like smoke. Her feet weren't touching the ground. She was gliding about 6 feet above the desert floor, keeping pace with my rig at 85 miles per hour. And she was looking directly at me through my side window. When our eyes met, she smiled that horrible twisted smile and raised one pale hand to wave at me. Her lips moved, and even though I couldn't hear her voice over the engine noise, I could read what she was saying. "Let me in, Roy. Let me in." I floored the accelerator, pushing my truck to its maximum safe speed. My tachometer redlined as the diesel engine roared, but the woman in white kept pace effortlessly. She was no longer just running beside my truck. She was getting closer, gliding toward my cab. My CB radio exploded with static and voices, not the clear communication I'd been having with other drivers, but a chaos of overlapping whispers and half-heard words. Through the electronic noise, I could make out fragments. "She's in the truck now. Been waiting so long. Never let him leave. Mile marker 350. Always mile marker 350. I reached for the radio to try switching channels again, but as soon as I touched the handset, every voice on the CB spoke in unison. "Roy!" The sound of my name, spoken by dozens of different voices simultaneously, filled the cab. I yanked my hand away from the radio as if it had burned me. Outside my window, the woman in white was now close enough that I could see the details of her face clearly. Her skin had the waxy, translucent quality of a corpse, and those black eyes seemed to look right through me. She pressed one pale hand against my passenger window, and frost began to spread across the glass from her touch. The temperature in my cab dropped so fast that my breath became visible. Ice crystals started forming on the inside of all my windows. My heater was running full blast, but it might as well have been broken. "What do you want?" I shouted, even though I knew she couldn't hear me through the glass. She pointed to my passenger door and mouthed the words again. "Let me in." The breathing sound behind the curtain resumed, but now it was coming from multiple sources. It sounded like a whole crowd of people back there, all breathing in perfect synchronization. I grabbed my CB handset one more time, desperate to reach someone, anyone who could help me. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Roy eastbound on I-80 mile marker 430. I need help. There's something in my truck. Can anyone hear me?" The radio crackled, and a familiar voice came through. Dale, the first driver I'd spoken to hours earlier. "Roy, this is Dale. I can hear you loud and clear." "Dale, thank God. I need you to call the police. There's something wrong with this stretch of highway. The woman in white, she's not just standing by the road anymore. She's following my truck." "Roy, listen to me carefully. How long have you been driving tonight?" The question seemed odd, but I answered anyway. "About 5 hours. I started around 11:30 p.m. Roy, it's 3:30 in the morning. But according to your GPS and mile markers, you should have crossed into Utah an hour ago. Where exactly do you think you are right now?" I looked at my GPS display, and my blood turned to ice. According to the screen, I was at mile marker 350, the exact same place where I'd first seen the woman in white hours ago. But that was impossible. I'd been driving east continuously for hours. I'd seen mile markers 370, 390, 410, 430. I had to be well into Utah by now. "Dale, my GPS is malfunctioning. I'm at mile marker 430, not 350. "Roy, look outside your cab. Really look. Tell me what you see." I glanced around at the landscape illuminated by my headlights. The same Joshua trees, the same rocky hill, the same curve in the highway. It was the exact same stretch of desert where I'd first encountered her. "That's impossible," I whispered. "Roy, you've been driving in circles for the past 4 hours. Every time you reach mile marker 355, the road loops back to mile marker 350. You never left. You never escaped." The woman outside my window heard Dale's words through the CB radio, and her smile grew wider. She tapped on the glass with one pale finger, leaving frost patterns in the shape of letters. LETMEIN. "Dale, how do I get out of here?" "I don't know, Roy. Nobody who's gotten trapped in the loop after seeing her 3 times has ever reported getting free." "What do you mean? What happened to them?" There was a long pause. When Dale's voice came back, it was barely above a whisper. "Roy, I need to tell you something. Something I should have mentioned when you first called in. My name is Dale Morrison. I've been driving this route for 15 years, just like I told you. But Roy, I died on this highway in 2004. My truck jackknifed during an ice storm right at mile marker 350. The CB radio filled with static, and through the electronic noise I could hear other voices, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. "This is Frank. Died mile marker 352. Brake failure, 1987. Vernon here. Heart attack mile marker 349, 1995. Blake, rollover accident mile marker 351, 2011. All the voices I'd been hearing on the radio, they were all dead truckers, trapped on the same stretch of highway where they'd lost their lives. And now I was trapped with them. The woman in white pressed both hands against my passenger window now, her black eyes boring into mine. The frost patterns on the glass spelled out a longer message. WELCOMEHOMEROY. Behind me, the curtain to my sleeper berth began to move. Not the gentle swaying I'd noticed before, but a deliberate pulling motion, as if someone was trying to part the fabric from the inside. And through the CB radio, all those dead voices began to chant in unison. "One of us, one of us, one of us." The woman outside my window pulled her hands away from the glass and pointed behind me toward the sleeper berth. Her message was clear. She wanted me to look back there. She wanted me to see what was waiting for me in the darkness behind the curtain. But I knew that if I turned around, if I saw whatever was back there, it would be over. The loop would be complete. I'd become just another voice on the CB radio, warning future drivers about the white lady of mile marker 350. My only hope was to keep driving and try to find some way to break the cycle before the sun rose. Because something told me that when dawn came, if I was still trapped in this loop, I wouldn't be leaving this stretch of highway alive. The breathing behind the curtain grew louder, more insistent, and in the distance ahead I could see the familiar Joshua trees that marked the beginning of the curve. The same curve I'd been driving around for the past 4 hours. Mile marker 350 was coming up again, and the woman in white was no longer content to stay outside my truck. As mile marker 350 approached for what had to be the 15th time, I made a desperate decision. Instead of following the highway around the curve like I'd been doing for hours, I yanked the steering wheel hard to the right and drove my 18-wheeler straight out into the desert. The truck bounced and lurched as the tires left the pavement and hit the rough terrain. Sagebrush scraped against my bumper and undercarriage as I plowed through the desert at 40 miles per hour, my headlights cutting through the darkness to illuminate Joshua trees and rocky outcroppings. Behind me, the curtain to my sleeper berth was thrashing violently now, as if something was fighting to get through, but I didn't look back. I couldn't afford to. My CB radio erupted with the voices of the dead truckers. "Roy, what are you doing? You can't escape by leaving the road. She'll follow you anywhere. Come back to the highway, Roy. Accept your fate." But I kept driving into the desert, steering around the larger obstacles and praying that my truck wouldn't get stuck in the soft sand. My speedometer showed 35 miles per hour, then 30, then 25 as the terrain got rougher. That's when I saw her in my side mirror. The woman in white was still there, still keeping pace with my truck. But she wasn't gliding above the ground anymore. She was gliding, directly through the sagebrush and rocks as if they weren't even there. Her white dress never snagged on the thorny plants, never got dirty from the desert dust. She moved like a ghost through solid matter, because that's exactly what she was. I pushed the truck harder, coaxing another 5 miles per hour out of the protesting diesel engine. Rocks pinged off my undercarriage and dust clouds rose behind my trailer, but I kept going. Somewhere ahead in the darkness, there had to be another road, a way out of this nightmare loop that had trapped me for hours. My GPS screen showed nothing but blank desert in every direction. According to the electronic map, I-80 was the only road for 50 miles in any direction. But that couldn't be right. There had to be other highways, other escape routes. The breathing behind the curtain had stopped, replaced by a different sound, something that made my blood freeze in my veins. It was the sound of a zipper being pulled down slowly, tooth by tooth. The access zipper to my sleeper berth was opening from the inside. I risked a glance in the rearview mirror and immediately wished I hadn't. The curtain was parting, and through the gap, I could see a pale hand gripping the fabric. The same translucent, corpse-white skin I'd been seeing through my passenger window. She was already inside my truck. Had been inside, probably for hours, while I'd been distracted by her appearances on the roadside. The woman I'd been seeing outside was just a distraction, a way to keep my attention focused away from what was really happening. No, I muttered, pressing harder on the accelerator even as the truck's engine began to overheat from the strain of off-road driving. "This isn't real. This can't be real." The CB radio crackled with Dale's voice. "Roy, it's too late. She's in your truck now. There's no escape." "There has to be a way out," I shouted at the radio. "You didn't all just give up and die." "Some fought longer than others," came Vernon's dead voice through the speaker. "Frank drove into the desert just like you're doing now. Made it almost 3 miles before his engine seized up. Blake tried to ram his truck into the mountain," added another voice. "Thought he could end it on his own terms." "None of it matters," Dale said sadly. "The White Lady always gets what she wants. And what she wants is company. Eternal company on her stretch of highway." Behind me, the curtain parted completely, and I could feel a presence moving forward into the cab. The temperature dropped so fast that ice began forming on my breath. My mirrors fogged over with frost, making it impossible to see behind me. But I could feel her there, sitting in the passenger seat that had shown the mysterious depression earlier. The cushions creaked under invisible weight, and I could smell something horrible. The sweet, cloying scent of flowers at a funeral mixed with the musty odor of a grave. My truck hit a large rock and bounced violently, nearly throwing me out of my seat. The engine temperature gauge was redlining now, and I could see steam rising from under the hood. The truck wouldn't make it much farther. That's when I saw lights ahead in the desert. Not the soft glow of a town or the harsh glare of another highway, but something else. A cluster of lights arranged in a rough circle, flickering like candles in the wind. As I got closer, the lights resolved into what they really were. The headlights and running lights of other trucks, maybe a dozen of them, all parked in a circle in the middle of the desert. Some were newer rigs like mine, but others looked decades old. Trucks from the 70s and 80s with boxy cabs and chrome exhaust stacks. I realized I was looking at the final resting place of all the truckers who had tried to escape the loop by driving into the desert. Their trucks were still here, still running, their lights cutting through the darkness in an eternal vigil. And sitting behind the wheel of each truck was a pale figure in the shadows, the ghosts of drivers who had been trapped just like me. My engine finally gave up with a metallic grinding sound. Steam poured from the radiator as the truck rolled to a stop about 50 yards from the circle of ghost rigs. The silence that followed was absolute. No engine noise, no wind, nothing but the faint electrical hum of my dying truck's systems. "Welcome to the club, Roy," came Frank's voice through the CB radio. But now I could see where it was coming from. The ghost trucker sitting in a 1986 Peterbilt directly in front of me was holding a CB handset to his pale lips. I grabbed my own radio. "There has to be a way out. There has to be." "Maybe there is," said a new voice. A woman's voice, but not the malevolent whisper I'd been hearing. This voice was sad, tired, filled with decades of regret. But none of us have been brave enough to try it. "Who are you?" My name was Sarah. I was the first. I looked around the circle of trucks until I spotted an old 1970s Mack with a sleeper cab that had seen better days. Behind the windshield, I could make out the faint outline of a woman in trucker gear. Jeans, flannel shirt, baseball cap. "You're the white lady?" "No," Sarah said, her voice filled with infinite sadness. "I'm the one she was waiting for when she died. Margaret, that was her name. She was my younger sister. She was supposed to meet me at the truck stop in Battle Mountain back in 1981. I was running late on a delivery, so she decided to walk out to the highway to watch for my headlights. The pieces began falling into place. She was wearing her wedding dress because she was getting married the next day. She wanted to show me the dress, wanted me to be the first person to see her in it. But I never showed up at the truck stop. My rig broke down 50 miles west, and by the time I got there, the police had already found her body. I could feel the presence in my passenger seat growing stronger. The frost on my windows was so thick now that I couldn't see outside, but I didn't need to. I knew she was out there, waiting. "She blamed me," Sarah continued. "Said I abandoned her, left her to die alone in the desert. And maybe she was right. But when she came back, when she started appearing to truckers on this highway, I couldn't leave her alone again. So I stayed. For 40 years? Time doesn't mean much when you're dead, Roy. And she needed someone to talk to, someone who understood. All these years, I thought I was helping her. But I see now that I was just enabling her anger, her need for revenge against truckers like us." Through the CB radio, I could hear the other dead drivers murmuring their agreement. They'd all been trapped by their own guilt, their own need to somehow make amends for whatever they thought they'd done wrong. But I wasn't dead yet, and I wasn't ready to join their eternal truck stop in the desert. "Sarah, you said there might be a way out. What did you mean?" There was a long pause. "The loop only exists because Margaret's anger keeps it alive. She's been feeding off the guilt and fear of every trucker who gets trapped here, growing stronger with each new death. But if someone could face her without fear, without guilt, maybe the loop could be broken." "How?" "You'd have to let her in, Roy. Completely. Let her into your truck, into your mind. Face whatever she shows you without running, without trying to fight. And then you'd have to convince her to let go of her anger." The other truckers' voices filled the CB radio with protests. Don't listen to her, Roy. It's suicide. She'll kill you the moment you let her in. But Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. It's the only way, Roy. And it has to be someone who's still alive, someone who still has a choice. We're all trapped here by our own guilt. But you haven't given up yet. I looked around at the circle of ghost trucks, at the pale figures sitting behind their steering wheels, condemned to an eternity of regret and self-recrimination. Was that really better than taking a chance on Sarah's desperate plan? The frost on my windows was starting to clear, and I could see her again. Margaret, the white lady, standing just outside my driver's side door. She was no longer smiling. Instead, her pale face showed an expression of infinite sadness and longing. She raised one translucent hand and placed it against my window. Where her palm touched the glass, letters appeared in the frost. P-L-E-A-S-E. Not the demanding, "let me in," she'd been writing before, but a simple plea. For the first time since this nightmare began, she looked less like a malevolent spirit and more like what she really was. A young woman who had died alone and afraid in the desert, wearing her wedding dress, waiting for someone who never came. I reached for my door handle. "Roy, don't!" Dale's voice crackled through the CB. "You don't know what she'll do." But I was tired of running, tired of being afraid. And most of all, I was tired of watching Margaret suffer, even if she was already dead. I opened my driver's side door. The desert air was impossibly cold, far below freezing despite the fact that it was October in Nevada. My breath formed clouds of vapor as I stepped down from my cab, and frost immediately began forming on my clothes and hair. Margaret stood about 10 feet away, her white wedding dress pristine despite 40 years in the desert. Up close, I could see that she was young, maybe 25 at most, with delicate features and long dark hair that moved in a wind I couldn't feel. "Hello, Margaret," I said quietly. She stared at me with those black eyes, and for a moment I thought she was going to attack. But then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're not Sarah." "No, I'm not. My name is Roy, but Sarah's here too. She's been waiting for you." Margaret's head turned slowly toward the circle of trucks, and her eyes found the old Mac where her sister's ghost sat behind the wheel. For the first time in 40 years, the two sisters looked directly at each other. "She left me," Margaret said, her voice filled with pain. "She promised to be there, and she left me to die alone." "She tried to get to you," I said gently. "Her truck broke down. She couldn't make it in time." "Excuses." Margaret's voice turned bitter. "Always excuses. Just like all the others who drive these roads, thinking only of their schedules, their deadlines, never caring about the people they leave behind." "You're right," I said, and meant it. "We do get caught up in the job, in making our deliveries on time. Sometimes we forget that there are people who depend on us, who are waiting for us to come home." Margaret turned her attention back to me, studying my face in the cold desert darkness. "But that doesn't mean we don't care," I continued. "And it doesn't mean we deserve to die for our mistakes. Don't we?" She took a step closer, and the temperature dropped even further. "How many people have you disappointed, Roy? How many promises have you broken? How many times have you chosen your job over the people you love?" The questions hit me like physical blows, because they were true. How many family dinners had I missed for a delivery? How many birthdays, anniversaries, holidays? How many times had my ex-wife begged me to find a different job, one that would let me be home more? But instead of running from the guilt, I faced it head on. You're right. I have disappointed people. I've missed important moments, broken promises, but I'm still trying to do better. And the people I love, they know I'm trying. Margaret's expression softened slightly. Sarah used to say the same thing. always promising she'd be there for the next important event, always having a reason why she couldn't make it. "She's here now," I said. "She's been here for 40 years, Margaret. She never left you again." "Because I trapped her here." Margaret's voice rose to a wail that echoed across the desert. "Just like I trapped all of them. I was so angry, so hurt, that I wanted everyone to feel what I felt. The abandonment, the loneliness, the fear of dying alone." Tears were streaming down her pale cheeks now, and where they hit the desert sand, small flowers began to bloom. White desert primroses that shouldn't have been able to grow in the harsh, alkaline soil. "But you don't have to be alone anymore," I said, taking another step closer. "And you don't have to trap anyone else. Sarah's here. All these other drivers. They care about you. They stayed because they understand your pain. But they're dead because of me," Margaret sobbed. "They're all dead because I couldn't let go of my anger." "Then let go now." Sarah's voice came from behind me. I turned to see that she had climbed out of her ghost truck and was walking toward us. She looked exactly like she had in life. A tough, weathered woman in her 50s with calloused hands and kind eyes. "Sarah?" Margaret's voice was small, like a child's. "I'm here, little sister. I've always been here." The two sisters stood facing each other across 40 years of anger and regret. Then Margaret took a tentative step forward, and Sarah opened her arms. When they embraced, the desert around us began to change. The circle of ghost trucks started to fade, their headlights dimming one by one. The other dead truckers climbed out of their cabs, and as they did, their pale, ghostly appearances became more human, more at peace. "Thank you," Dale said to me as he walked past, tipping his baseball cap. "Thank you for helping us remember what we'd forgotten." One by one, the truckers said their goodbyes and faded away, finally free to move on to whatever comes after death. The trucks disappeared with them, leaving only tire tracks in the sand and the lingering smell of diesel exhaust. Soon, only Sarah, Margaret, and I remained in the desert. "What happens now?" I asked. Sarah looked at her sister with infinite tenderness. "Now we go home, our real home." Margaret nodded, then turned to me one last time. "Roy, will you do something for me?" "Of course. When you drive this highway again, remember us, not as ghosts or monsters, but as people who lost their way. And remember to call the people you love. Don't wait for the perfect time. Don't put it off for one more delivery. Call them now, while you still can." "I will," I promised. The sisters began to fade, becoming translucent in the starlight. But before they disappeared completely, Margaret smiled. Not the twisted, horrible grin I'd seen through my truck windows, but a genuine, peaceful smile. "Thank you for not being afraid of me, Roy. Thank you for seeing past my anger to the person underneath." And then they were gone, leaving me alone in the desert with my broken-down truck and the first hints of dawn beginning to show on the eastern horizon. I climbed back into my cab and tried the ignition. To my amazement, the engine turned over on the first try. According to my GPS, I was exactly where I should be. Mile marker 352 on I-80, just outside the small town of Battle Mountain, Nevada. The loop was broken. As I drove toward the rising sun, I kept my promise to Margaret. I pulled out my cell phone and called my ex-wife, the first time we'd spoken in 6 months. "Roy?" she answered, sounding surprised. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah," I said, watching the desert landscape roll by through my windshield. "Everything's okay. I just wanted to hear your voice, and to tell you I'm sorry for all the times I wasn't there." We talked for an hour as I drove through the morning light, really talked in a way we hadn't done in years. And when we finally said goodbye, she said something that made my heart ache. "Drive safe, Roy. Come home soon." I've made that run through Nevada dozens of times since then, always during daylight hours. I never saw Margaret or Sarah again, but sometimes, when I pass mile marker 350, I catch a glimpse of white desert primroses blooming along the roadside, flowers that shouldn't be able to grow in that harsh environment, but somehow do. And every time I see them, I remember my promise. I pull over and call someone I love, just to let them know I'm thinking of them, because in the end, that's all any of us really want, to know that someone cares enough to remember we exist, to pick up the phone, to not leave us waiting alone in the dark. The White Lady taught me that, and I've never forgotten the lesson. 6 months later, I was driving that same stretch of I-80 through Nevada, hauling a load of electronics from Reno to Denver. It was mid-afternoon this time, the desert sun beating down mercilessly on my Kenworth's cab. I deliberately scheduled this run for daylight hours. Old habits die hard, and despite everything that had happened with Margaret and Sarah, I still felt more comfortable crossing that particular section of highway when I could see for miles in every direction. As I approached mile marker 350, I did what I always did now. I pulled my rig over to the shoulder, put on my hazard lights, and climbed down from the cab with my cell phone in hand. The desert primroses were there, just like they'd been on every trip since that night. Clusters of white flowers growing impossibly in the alkaline soil, their petals bright and clean despite the dust and wind. I'd looked up desert primroses online afterward and learned they were indeed native to Nevada, but they typically only bloomed in the spring after heavy winter rains. These flowers bloomed year-round in defiance of every natural law. But then again, there was nothing natural about this place. I selected my ex-wife Linda's number from my contacts and hit dial. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, Roy, right on schedule. Let me guess. Mile marker 350? "You know me too well," I said, smiling despite myself. These calls had become a regular thing between us over the past 6 months. Not romantic. That ship had sailed years ago, but something better. A friendship built on honesty and mutual respect. "How's the road treating you?" "Can't complain. Perfect weather, light traffic. Should be in Denver by tomorrow morning." We chatted for about 10 minutes about inconsequential things. Her job at the library, my thoughts about maybe settling down somewhere permanent when I had enough money saved up, the weird weather patterns we'd both been noticing lately. Normal conversation between two people who had learned to appreciate each other's company without the complications of a failed marriage getting in the way. "Roy," she said as we were wrapping up, "I'm proud of you. You know that?" "For what?" "For keeping your promise. For making these calls. I know it's not easy for someone like you to be, well, emotionally available. But you've really changed since that night you told me about." I looked out at the desert, at the impossible flowers blooming in the harsh landscape, and thought about Margaret and Sarah. Sometimes it takes a shock to wake us up to what's really important. Well, whatever happened out there, I'm glad it happened. Drive safe, okay? Always do. Talk to you next week. I ended the call and was about to climb back into my truck when I heard something that made me freeze. The distinctive rumble of a big rig engine approaching from the west. Nothing unusual about that. I-80 was a major trucking route, but this engine sounded different somehow. Older, like one of those classic rigs from the 70s or 80s. I turned toward the sound and saw a truck cresting the hill about a mile away. Even at that distance, I could tell it was an old Peterbilt, probably a 359 from the late 70s, judging by the long hood and the way the cab sat high above the chassis. It was painted in a faded blue and white color scheme that had seen better decades. As it got closer, I could make out more details. The chrome was pitted and dull, the paint was chipped and sun-faded, and there were rust spots around the wheel wells. But the truck was moving smoothly down the highway, its exhaust stack putting out just a thin wisp of black smoke. The weird part was that I couldn't see a driver behind the windshield. The afternoon sun was creating some glare, but I should have been able to make out at least a silhouette of someone sitting in the driver's seat. The Peterbilt slowed as it approached my location and pulled over onto the shoulder about 50 yards behind my truck. The engine idled for a moment, that distinctive Detroit diesel rumble that you don't hear much anymore, then shut off with a final shudder. I waited for someone to get out, but the driver's door remained closed. After about 30 seconds, I decided to walk back and see if whoever it was needed assistance. Truckers look out for each other on the road. It's one of the unwritten rules of the profession. But as I got closer to the old Peterbilt, I could see that the cab was completely empty. The driver's seat was worn leather, cracked and patched in several places. The dashboard was the old-style analog gauges, not a digital display in sight. Everything looked authentic to the era, right down to the CB radio mounted under the dash and the fuzzy dice hanging from the rearview mirror. But there was nobody inside. I walked around to the passenger side, thinking maybe the driver had gotten out on that side and I'd missed it somehow. Still nobody. I cupped my hands against the window and peered into the sleeper berth. Empty. "Hello?" I called out, feeling slightly foolish. "Anyone there?" The only answer was the whisper of wind through the sagebrush and the distant sound of traffic on I-80. I was about to head back to my own truck when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was a logbook open on the passenger seat, and I could just make out some of the handwriting through the window. The page was dated October 15th, 1978, over 40 years ago. But that wasn't what scared me. What scared me was the name written at the top of the page in faded blue ink. Dale Morrison. I stumbled backward from the truck, my heart hammering in my chest. Dale Morrison was the first driver I'd talked to on my CB radio that horrible night 6 months ago. The one who'd told me about the white lady, who'd tried to warn me about what was happening. The one who'd told me he died in an ice storm in 2004, which meant this couldn't be his truck. Dale had been driving for 15 years when he died, and if this logbook was from 1978, the dates didn't match up. Unless Dale had been lying about when he died. Or unless I'd gotten the details wrong in my traumatized state that night. I walked back to the driver's side of the Peterbilt and tried the door handle. It was unlocked. The door swung open with a loud creak that spoke of old hinges and minimal maintenance. I climbed up into the cab, feeling like I was trespassing in a museum. Everything was exactly as it would have been in a truck from that era. The hard bench seat, the floor-mounted gear shifter, the simple heater controls. Even the smell was right. Old leather, diesel fumes, and the lingering ghost of cigarette smoke. The CB radio was turned on, its channel selector set to 19. I reached for the handset, my hand trembling slightly. "Break 19. This is Roy at mile marker 350. Dale, if you're out there, I need to talk to you." Static filled the cab for several long seconds. Then, faint but clear, I heard a familiar voice. "Roy? Roy, is that you, son?" "Dale, what's going on? Whose truck is this?" "It's mine, Roy. My first truck. Bought her brand new in 1978 when I was just 26 years old. Drove her for 15 years before I traded up to a newer rig." "But you said you died in 2004. "I did. But not in this truck. This old girl was sitting in a salvage yard in Utah when I passed on. I guess when you helped Margaret and Sarah cross over, it freed up some of the energy that was keeping us trapped. Gave us options." I looked around the cab with new eyes. It was old, yes, but it was also lovingly maintained. Someone had taken care of this truck long after it should have been scrapped. "Dale, why are you here? I thought you'd moved on." "Most of us did, Roy. found our peace, went to whatever comes next. But a few of us, well, we decided we weren't quite ready to leave the road behind. This highway has been our home for so long we couldn't imagine existing anywhere else. So you're still, what? Still trucking? Dale's laugh came through the CB speaker, warm and genuine. Something like that. We're kind of the guardian angels of I-80 now. Keep an eye on the living drivers. Help out when we can. Make sure nobody else gets trapped the way we were. I thought about that for a moment. The night I broke down in the desert, when my engine overheated, it started right up again in the morning like nothing had happened. Wasn't much wrong with it in the first place. Margaret's influence was making you think it was worse than it was. Once she let go of her anger, your truck was fine. And the other times I've driven this route since then, I've never had any problems, even when other drivers on the CB have been complaining about mechanical issues. We look after our friends, Roy. You did us a good turn that night. Helped us remember who we used to be before we got lost in all that anger and regret. Least we can do is make sure you get home safe. I sat in silence for a moment, absorbing what Dale was telling me. The idea that the ghosts of dead truckers were somehow watching over the living drivers on I-80 should have been terrifying. Instead, I found it oddly comforting. Dale, can I ask you something? Shoot. That night when I broke the loop, did I really see Margaret and Sarah cross over? Or did I just imagine it? Oh, you saw it all right. They're at peace now, Roy. Really and truly at peace. Margaret's anger finally burned itself out, and Sarah was able to let go of her guilt. Last we saw of them, they were walking into a light that looked like the sunrise, holding hands and laughing like they used to when they were kids. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. For 6 months, I'd wondered if that whole experience had been some kind of hallucination brought on by exhaustion and stress. Knowing that it had been real, that I'd actually helped 2 lost souls find peace, made all the terror of that night worthwhile. Roy, I need to ask you a favor, Dale said. Anything. There's going to be a young driver coming through here tonight. First-time trucker, just got his CDL last month. He's running scared, pushing too hard, not getting enough sleep. Kind of reminds me of myself when I was starting out. What do you want me to do? Stick around for a few more hours. When he comes by, you'll know him when you see him. He's driving a beat-up old International with Oklahoma plates. Get on the CB and talk to him. Let him know he's not alone out here. Sometimes that's all it takes to keep someone from making a fatal mistake. I looked at my watch. I'd been planning to push through to Denver tonight, but my delivery wasn't scheduled until tomorrow afternoon. I had plenty of time to spare. I'll wait, I said. But Dale, how do you know about this driver? We see things differently now, Roy. Time isn't as linear as it used to be. We can see the patterns, the choices that lead to tragedy. Most of the time we can't interfere directly, but sometimes we can nudge things in the right direction. By getting someone like me to help. Exactly. The living can reach the living in ways we can't anymore. I climbed down from Dale's truck and walked back to my own rig. As I passed the Peterbilt, I heard the engine start up with that distinctive Detroit diesel rumble. I turned around to wave goodbye, but the truck was already pulling back onto the highway, accelerating smoothly up the grade toward Battle Mountain. I watched until it disappeared over the hill, then settled into my own cab to wait. I pulled out a paperback novel I'd been working on, an old Louis L'Amour Western, and tried to read. But my attention kept drifting to the CB radio, waiting for the voice of a scared young trucker who didn't know he was about to get some help from beyond the grave. The sun was setting behind the mountains when I finally heard him. Break 19, this is Billy eastbound on I-80. Anyone out there? The voice was young, uncertain, with a slight Oklahoma accent. I grabbed my CB handset. Billy, this is Roy at mile marker 350. I copy you loud and clear. What's your 20? Roy, thank God. I'm about 15 miles west of you, I think. Listen, I'm having some trouble staying awake here. Been driving for, hell, I don't even know how many hours. Lost track. Billy, when's the last time you got some real sleep? Real sleep? Maybe 2 days ago. I've been grabbing cat naps at truck stops, but I'm trying to make good time on this run. It's my first long haul, and I don't want to screw it up. I thought about what Dale had said, about seeing the patterns that lead to tragedy. Billy, listen to me very carefully. Your first priority isn't making good time. It's getting home alive. You need to pull over at the next safe spot and get some rest. But Roy, I've got a delivery schedule to meet. If I'm late on my first run, son, I've been driving for over 20 years, and I can tell you right now that no delivery is worth your life. Companies would rather have their freight arrive late than not at all. Pull over, get some sleep, and finish your run when you're alert enough to do it safely. There was a long pause. I don't know, Roy. I'm scared if I stop, I won't be able to get started again. You know what I mean? Like I'll lose my nerve. I did know what he meant. I remembered those early days, the constant fear of failure, the pressure to prove myself in a profession that didn't suffer fools or weaklings. Billy, let me tell you something. The best drivers I know, the ones who've been doing this for decades, they're the ones who learned early on to trust their instincts. And right now, your instincts are telling you that you're too tired to drive safely. Listen to them. You really think I should stop? I know you should. Look, there's a truck stop about 20 miles ahead of you in Battle Mountain. Good food, clean showers, safe place to park. Get yourself a hot meal, take a shower, and sleep for at least 6 hours. Your freight will still be there when you wake up, and you'll be in much better shape to deliver it safely. Another pause. Okay, Roy. Okay. You're right. I can see the lights of the truck stop now. I'm going to pull off. Good man. Billy, one more thing. What company are you driving for? Western Express out of Nashville. I know some dispatchers there. If you have any trouble with them giving you grief about the delay, you give them my name. Roy Hutchins. Tell them I said you were following DOT safety regulations by taking mandatory rest when you were too fatigued to drive safely. Roy, Thank you. I was about ready to drive off the road back there. I mean literally. I was seeing things, you know? Weird stuff. A chill ran down my spine. What kind of weird stuff? Lights in the desert where there shouldn't be any lights. And once I swear I saw a woman in a white dress standing beside the road. But when I looked again, she was gone. I gripped the CB handset tighter. Billy, get to that truck stop right now. Don't stop for anything. And once you're there, don't leave until you've had at least 6 hours of sleep. Promise me. I promise, Roy. Thanks again. You probably saved my life tonight. Just pass it on, Billy. When you've been driving long enough to help the next scared rookie, remember this conversation. I will. Billy out. The CB went silent, and I sat back in my seat, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. In the gathering darkness, I could see the glow of the Battle Mountain truck stop in the distance, a beacon of safety for tired drivers. My own CB crackled one more time. Nice work, Roy. It was Dale's voice, faint but clear. Think he'll be okay? He'll be fine. Got a good long career ahead of him, that boy does. And Roy, thanks. From all of us. Thank you, Dale, for watching over us out here. It's what we do now. What we were always meant to do, I think. We just forgot for a while. The radio went quiet for the last time, and I started my engine. As I pulled back onto I-80 and headed east toward Denver, I thought about the strange community that existed on these highways, the living and the dead, all looking out for each other in their own ways. Mile marker 350 disappeared in my rearview mirror, but I knew I'd be back. This stretch of Nevada highway had become a regular part of my route, a place where I could honor my promise to Margaret, stay in touch with the people I cared about, and occasionally help a fellow driver in need. And somewhere out there in the desert, among the impossible white primroses that bloomed year-round in the alkaline soil, the spirits of dead truckers continued their eternal watch over the living, making sure that no one else would be trapped by anger or regret the way they once were. The highway stretched out ahead of me, dark and endless under the Nevada stars. But I wasn't afraid of the darkness anymore. I knew I wasn't driving alone. None of us ever were. As I merged back into traffic and set my cruise control for the long haul to Denver, I caught a glimpse in my side mirror of an old blue and white Peterbilt following about a quarter-mile behind me. Its headlights cut through the night like guardian angels' wings, keeping watch over all of us who had chosen the road as our home. And for the first time in 22 years of trucking, I understood what the old-timers meant when they talked about the brotherhood of the road. It wasn't just about the living drivers helping each other out. It was about the eternal bond between everyone who had ever answered the call of the highway, whether they were still breathing or not. The road went on forever, and so did we. The name's Clint Mayfield, and I've been hauling freight across the lower 48 for going on 18 years now. Started back in 2006 when I got laid off from the steel mill in Gary, Indiana, and trucking seemed like the only job that paid enough to keep my head above water after the divorce. Turned out to be a blessing in disguise. I've got a natural feel for handling a big rig, and the solitude suits me just fine, most of the time anyway. What I'm about to tell you happened in March of 2018, during what should have been a routine run from Houston to Minneapolis. I was hauling a load of oil field equipment, heavy stuff that made my trailer pull hard to the left if I didn't keep both hands on the wheel. The pay was good though, nearly $2,000 for the round trip, so I wasn't complaining about working a little harder for my money. I'd picked up the load on a Tuesday morning and planned to drive straight through, maybe grabbing a 6-hour break somewhere in Oklahoma or Kansas to satisfy the DOT sleep requirements. My truck at the time was a 2015 Freightliner Cascadia with a 72-inch sleeper berth. Not huge, but comfortable enough for a guy my size to catch some decent rest when needed. The sleeper was set up the way I liked it. A firm mattress, blackout curtains to keep the sunlight out during day sleeps, and a small TV mounted on the wall for those times when I couldn't fall asleep right away. I kept it clean and organized, a place for everything and everything in its place. After spending so much time on the road, your truck becomes your home, and I've always been particular about keeping my home tidy. Everything started normally enough. I rolled out of Houston around 7 a.m. with a full tank of diesel and a thermos of coffee that was strong enough to wake the dead. Traffic wasn't too bad for a Tuesday morning, and I made good time through the city and out onto I-45 heading north. The weather was clear, my truck was running smooth, and I had my favorite country station playing softly through the cab speakers. By noon, I'd crossed into Texas Hill Country, and by mid-afternoon, I was approaching Dallas. That's where I hit my first snag. Construction traffic that backed up for miles. What should have been a 30-minute drive through the city turned into nearly 3 hours of stop-and-go traffic, with my engine temperature climbing dangerously high in the Texas heat. By the time I finally cleared Dallas and got back up to highway speeds, the sun was setting, and I was already 2 hours behind my planned schedule. I could have stopped for the night and started fresh in the morning, but like I said, the pay on this load was too good to risk being late. So I pushed on into the gathering darkness, figuring I'd drive through the night and grab my mandatory break somewhere in Kansas the next morning. That decision probably saved my life, though I didn't know it at the time. I was about an hour north of Dallas, cruising through some empty farmland on I-35, when I first noticed something was off. It was subtle at first, just a feeling that something had changed in my cab, though I couldn't put my finger on what it was. The radio was still playing the same country station. My gauges all showed normal readings. The air conditioning was working fine, keeping the cab at a comfortable 72 degrees despite the warm Texas evening. But something felt different. I tried to shake it off, figuring I was just tired from the long day and the stress of sitting in Dallas traffic for 3 hours. But the feeling persisted as I drove north through Texas, getting stronger rather than weaker as the miles rolled by. It wasn't until I was approaching the Oklahoma border that I realized what was bothering me. The air in the cab felt thicker somehow, like the atmosphere had changed, become more dense. I found myself taking slightly deeper breaths, as if there wasn't quite enough oxygen in the air. I checked my air conditioning system, thinking maybe something was wrong with the circulation, but everything seemed to be working normally. Cool air was flowing from the vents, and when I cracked my driver's side window, the fresh night air that came in felt perfectly normal. It was only the air inside my cab that felt strange. Around 10 p.m., I crossed into Oklahoma and decided to fuel up at a truck stop in Ardmore. I pulled into the diesel island, killed the engine, and climbed down from the cab. The moment I stepped outside, I felt like I could breathe properly again. The night air was crisp and clean, with just a hint of the approaching spring. But when I climbed back into the cab after fueling up and paying for my diesel, that thick, oppressive feeling returned immediately. It was like stepping into a room where too many people had been breathing the same air for too long. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, trying to figure out what could be causing the problem. Carbon monoxide leak? No, that would make me dizzy and nauseous, not just feel like the air was thick. Problem with the cabin air filter? Maybe, but I'd had it changed less than a month ago. Finally, I decided I was just being paranoid. Long-haul trucking can play tricks on your mind, especially when you're driving alone for hours at a time. Your imagination starts working overtime, finding problems where none exist. I fired up the engine and pulled back onto I-35, planning to push through to Kansas before taking my mandatory break. The radio was playing an old Garth Brooks song, and I turned it up a little louder to keep myself alert. That's when I heard it for the first time. It was so faint at first that I thought it was just part of the song, maybe some subtle background vocals or instrumentation that I'd never noticed before. But when the song ended and the DJ started talking, the sound was still there. Breathing. Not my own breathing. I was conscious of that, monitoring it because of the strange, thick feeling in the air. This was different. Slower, deeper, more deliberate than my own rhythm. I turned down the radio and listened carefully. There it was, clear as day, the sound of someone taking slow, steady breaths somewhere behind me in the cab. I glanced in my rearview mirror, even though I knew I was alone in the truck. The sleeper berth curtain was drawn, just like always, blocking my view of the back area. But I could hear the breathing coming from that direction, soft but unmistakably present. My first thought was that somehow someone had gotten into my truck while I was fueling up in Ardmore. Maybe a homeless person looking for a warm place to sleep, or even a thief planning to rob me once I stopped for the night. It sounds crazy, but stranger things have happened on the road. I pulled over at the next exit and parked under a streetlight in front of a closed gas station. My heart was pounding as I grabbed a flashlight from my glove box and prepared to check the sleeper berth. The breathing sound had stopped the moment I pulled over. I climbed into the back of the cab and pulled aside the curtain, shining my flashlight into every corner of the sleeper compartment. Nothing. No one hiding behind the small dresser, no one crammed into the tiny closet space, no one anywhere in the back of my truck. I even got out and checked the exterior access door to the sleeper berth. Still locked tight, no signs of tampering. But as soon as I got back behind the wheel and started driving again, the breathing resumed. This time, I was ready for it. I counted the intervals, 1 breath every 4 seconds, like clockwork. Definitely not my imagination. There was something in my cab, something I couldn't see but could clearly hear. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was some kind of mechanical sound, air brakes cycling, or a problem with my air conditioning system that just happened to sound like breathing. Trucks are complex machines with hundreds of moving parts, and sometimes they make strange noises that can fool you into thinking you're hearing something else. But deep down, I knew this wasn't mechanical. This was organic, deliberate. Someone or something was breathing in my sleeper berth, matching the rhythm of a living creature at rest. I grabbed my CB radio and switched to channel 19. Break 19, this is Clint northbound on I-35 around mile marker 45. Any drivers out there? A voice crackled back immediately. An older man with a gravelly voice and a slight Texas accent. Clint, this is Wade westbound about 20 miles ahead of you. What's your 20 and how can I help? Wade, this might sound crazy, but I keep hearing breathing sounds in my cab, like someone's in my sleeper berth, but I've checked back there twice and there's nobody there. There was a pause. Clint, how long you been driving today? About 15 hours, but I'm not hallucinating. I know what I'm hearing. Brother, I've been pulling freight for 30 years, and I can tell you that fatigue can play some serious tricks on your mind. When's the last time you got some real sleep? Yesterday. Look, Wade, I know how this sounds, but I'm wide awake and alert. There's something in my truck. Another pause, longer this time. Clint, where exactly did you fuel up last? Ardmore, maybe an hour ago. Why? Which truck stop? I told him the name of the truck stop, and I heard Wade suck in a sharp breath. Clint, you need to get off the road right now. Find the nearest safe place to park and get out of your truck. What? Why? Because that truck stop, let's just say it's got a reputation among drivers. Things happen there that don't happen other places. Bad things. My blood ran cold. What kind of things? Look, I don't want to spook you more than you already are, but there have been incidents. Drivers who fueled up there and then reported, well, let's call them unexplained experiences. Most of the time it's just weird sounds or feelings, but sometimes what? Sometimes drivers don't make it to their destination. Their trucks get found abandoned on the side of the road. Driver nowhere to be found. Always happens within 50 miles of that truck stop. I looked at my odometer. I'd driven about 35 miles since leaving Ardmore. The breathing behind me seemed to get louder, more pronounced. And for the first time, I thought I detected something else mixed in with it. A faint whispering sound, like someone trying to speak without moving their lips. Wade, I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with here. Clint, there's a truck stop about 10 miles north of your position. Well lit, good security, always busy. Get there as fast as you can, and whatever you do, don't stop until you reach it. And don't look in your rearview mirror. Why not? But Wade's signal had faded to static, leaving me alone with whatever was sharing my cab. I pressed harder on the accelerator, pushing my truck up to 75 miles per hour. Behind me, the breathing continued, steady, patient, unchanging. But now I was sure I could hear whispering too, so faint that I couldn't make out words but definitely present. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to pull over, get out of the truck and run as far as I could. But Wade's warning echoed in my mind. Don't stop until you reach the truck stop. 10 miles had never felt so long. I was about 5 miles away from the truck stop Wade had mentioned when I made the mistake he'd warned me against. I glanced in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just the familiar view of my sleeper berth with the curtain drawn across it. But as I watched, the curtain began to move, not swaying like it would from road vibrations or air currents, but bulging outward as if something was pressing against it from behind. Something with the approximate size and shape of a human torso. I forced my eyes back to the road, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. The breathing was getting louder now, and the whispering was becoming more distinct. I still couldn't make out individual words, but the tone was becoming clearer, urgent, pleading, desperate. The exit for the truck stop appeared ahead, and I took it at dangerous speed, my trailer swaying as I negotiated the off-ramp. The truck stop was exactly as Wade had described, well lit, busy, with dozens of other trucks parked in the lot. I pulled into the first available parking space and killed the engine. The moment the diesel motor shut off, the breathing stopped. I sat in the sudden silence, my hands trembling as I tried to process what had just happened. The truck stop was full of other drivers, normal people going about their business. The familiar sounds of truck engines, air brakes, and distant conversation drifted through my windows. Everything seemed normal again, but I knew that if I started my engine and continued north, the breathing would return. Whatever had gotten into my truck in Ardmore wasn't finished with me yet. I was debating whether to abandon my load and fly home when I heard a tap on my passenger window. An older man in a trucker's cap and worn denim jacket was standing outside, gesturing for me to roll down the window. "You Clint?" he asked when I cracked the glass. "Yeah. You Wade?" He nodded grimly. "We need to talk, and you need to hear what happened to the last driver who fueled up at that truck stop in Ardmore." I grabbed my jacket and climbed down from the cab, grateful to be breathing normal air again. But as we walked toward the truck stop restaurant, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from inside my sleeper berth. Something that had no intention of letting me finish this run alive. And as we entered the brightly lit restaurant, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My truck's interior dome light was on, even though I was certain I'd turned it off when I parked. Someone, or something, was moving around inside my cab, and it was waiting for me to come back. Wade bought us both coffee and led me to a corner booth in the truck stop restaurant where we could talk without being overheard. He was probably in his 60s, with the weathered face and calloused hands of someone who'd spent decades behind the wheel of a big rig, but his eyes held a haunted quality that made me uneasy. "Before I tell you what you're dealing with," he said, stirring sugar into his coffee, "I need to ask you something. When you were fueling up in Ardmore, did you go inside the truck stop?" "Yeah, to pay for my diesel and use the restroom. Why?" "Did you talk to anyone? Buy anything besides fuel?" I thought back to my stop in Ardmore. I grabbed a sandwich from the deli case and a couple energy drinks, talked to the clerk for maybe 30 seconds when I paid. Wade's expression darkened. "What did the clerk look like?" "I don't know. Normal, I guess. Middle-aged guy, kind of thin, wearing a truck stop uniform shirt." "Why are you asking all these questions?" "Because the clerk at that truck stop died 3 years ago." The coffee cup slipped in my hands, sloshing hot liquid onto the table. "What are you talking about?" "His name was Marcus Webb. Worked the night shift at that truck stop for 15 years. Nice guy, always had a smile and a friendly word for the drivers. But in 2015, he was found dead in the back office. Apparent heart attack, they said. They hired a replacement, but that guy quit after 2 weeks, said the place gave him the creeps. Since then, they haven't been able to keep anyone on the night shift." I stared at Wade, trying to process what he was telling me. "But I talked to someone. I paid for my fuel and food." "I'm sure you did. The question is, who did you really talk to?" A chill ran down my spine. The clerk I'd interacted with had seemed perfectly normal. Polite, professional, maybe a little quiet. But now that I thought about it, there had been something odd about him. His skin had been unusually pale, and his movements had seemed sluggish somehow, like he was operating at half speed. "Wade, what exactly happened to the other drivers you mentioned?" Wade took a long sip of his coffee before answering. "The first incident I know about happened about 6 months after Marcus died. Driver named Lance picked up fuel there around 11 p.m., said he talked to a clerk who looked just like you described. Started his truck to leave and immediately began hearing strange sounds in his cab. Breathing, whispering, sounds like someone moving around in his sleeper berth. Just like what's happening to me. Exactly like what's happening to you. Lance made it about 40 miles before his truck was found jackknifed on the side of I-35. No skid marks, No signs of mechanical failure. Truck just veered off the road and flipped. They never found Lance's body. My hands were shaking now. How many others? 4 more that I know of for certain. Maybe twice that many if you count the drivers who just disappeared without their trucks being found. All of them fueled up at that truck stop. All of them reported the same strange experiences you're having now. But some drivers must have fueled up there and been fine, right? I mean, it's a busy truck stop. During the day, sure. Hundreds of drivers fuel up there every week with no problems. But after 10 p.m., when the night shift starts, that's when things get dangerous. That's when Marcus shows up. I looked out the restaurant window at my truck, still parked under the bright lights. The interior dome light was no longer on, but that somehow made me feel worse rather than better. Whatever was in there was learning to be more subtle. Wade, why are you telling me all this? How do you know so much about what happened? His face went pale and he stared down into his coffee cup. Because I was supposed to be the first victim. What do you mean? 3 years ago, I was running a load from Houston to Kansas City. Same route you're on now. My usual fuel stop was closed for repairs, so I detoured to that truck stop in Ardmore. It was about 11:30 p.m. when I pulled in. Wade paused, lost in the memory. Marcus was behind the counter, same as always. We chatted while I paid for my fuel, talked about the weather, the road conditions, normal truck stop conversation, but something felt off about him that night. He seemed distant, like he was there but not really there, if you know what I mean. Did you notice anything else unusual? His hands were ice cold when he gave me my change, and he kept staring at me with this strange look in his eyes, like he was trying to tell me something but couldn't find the words. When I left, he called out to me. What did he say? He said, "Drive safe, Wade, and don't look back." Wade took another sip of coffee, his hands trembling slightly. I made it about 20 miles before I started hearing the breathing in my sleeper berth. Same as what you're experiencing now. But I was lucky. My CB radio started acting up, picking up signals from other dimensions or something. I heard voices, dozens of them, all warning me to get off the road immediately. Did you? I pulled into this very truck stop and called my dispatcher, told him I was having mechanical problems and needed to overnight here for repairs. Spent the night in the restaurant, didn't go back to my truck until sunrise. When I finally did, everything was back to normal. No more breathing sounds, no more strange feelings. And you never had any problems after that? Wade shook his head. But here's the thing. The next morning, I heard on the CB that Marcus had been found dead in the back office of that truck stop in Ardmore. Heart attack, they said. But the coroner estimated he'd been dead for at least 6 hours. I did the math in my head, which means he was already dead when you talked to him. That's right. I was talking to a ghost and didn't even know it. But somehow Marcus managed to warn me, told me to drive safe and don't look back. I think he was trying to protect me from whatever was coming. But if Marcus is trying to protect drivers, why is he causing all these accidents? Wade's expression grew grim. Because I don't think it's Marcus doing it. I think something else is using his appearance, his memory, to lure drivers into danger. Something that feeds off, well, whatever it is that makes us alive. Before I could respond, my CB radio crackled to life from inside my truck. Even through the restaurant windows, I could hear voices coming through the speaker. Multiple voices, all talking at once in a chaotic jumble of words. Wade and I rushed outside to listen. As we got closer to my truck, the voices became clearer. Clint, can you hear us? Don't go back in the truck, Clint. It's waiting for you. It's hungry. It's been so long since it fed. Wade grabbed my arm. Those are the voices of the missing drivers, the ones who disappeared after fueling up at that truck stop. How is that possible? I don't know, but they're trying to warn you. just like they tried to warn the others. The question is, are you going to listen? I stared at my truck, knowing that my livelihood depended on completing this run. The load I was hauling was worth nearly $2,000 to me, money I desperately needed. But was any amount of money worth risking my life? As if reading my thoughts, Wade said, "Clint, that load isn't worth dying for. Whatever's in your truck, it's not going to give up and go away. It'll follow you all the way to Minneapolis if you let it." Then what do you suggest I do? I can't just abandon my truck? No, but maybe we don't have to. I've got an idea, but it's going to sound crazy. At this point, crazy sounds pretty reasonable. Wade pulled out his cell phone and scrolled through his contacts. I've got a friend who drives for the same company I do. Guy named Garrett, who knows more about the supernatural side of trucking than anyone I've ever met. He's helped other drivers deal with unusual situations. You mean there are more haunted truck stops? Clint, you'd be amazed how many strange things happen on America's highways. Most drivers don't talk about them because they're afraid of being labeled crazy, but Garrett's made it his business to study these phenomena. If anyone can help you, it's him. Wade dialed a number and waited. After a few rings, someone answered. Garrett, it's Wade. I've got a driver here who's got the Ardmore problem. Yeah, that truck stop. No, he's still alive, but he's got something in his cab. Okay, we'll wait for you. Wade ended the call and turned to me. Garrett's about 30 miles south of here. He'll be here in an hour. In the meantime, we need to keep an eye on your truck and make sure whatever's in there doesn't decide to come looking for you. As if summoned by his words, my truck's interior lights suddenly blazed to life. Not just the dome light this time, but every light in the cab and sleeper berth. The truck looked like a Christmas tree in the darkness. And then, in the rear window of my sleeper berth, I saw a silhouette. It was the unmistakable shape of a man sitting on my bunk, perfectly still, facing forward toward the cab. Even from 50 yards away, I could make out the details. The shape of shoulders, the curve of a head, the way the figure was positioned as if waiting patiently for something. Wade, I whispered. Do you see that? He followed my gaze and went rigid. Jesus Christ, it's showing itself. The figure in my sleeper berth didn't move, but I could swear it was watching us. And as I stared at the silhouette, I began to make out more details. The figure was wearing what looked like a truck stop uniform shirt. And even though I couldn't see its face clearly, something about the posture and build looked familiar. It looked like Marcus, the dead clerk from Ardmore. But if Marcus was trying to protect drivers like Wade believed, why was he sitting in my truck instead of warning me to stay away? Unless Wade was wrong about Marcus's intentions. Unless the thing wearing Marcus's appearance had been hunting truckers for 3 years, using the familiar face of a friendly clerk to lure them into trusting him. And now it was waiting in my sleeper berth, ready to claim its latest victim. The CB radio in my truck crackled again, but this time there was only one voice, calm, friendly, and terrifyingly familiar. Clint, why don't you come back to your truck? I've got something I want to show you. It was Marcus's voice, the same polite tone he'd used when I'd paid for my fuel in Ardmore. But Marcus was supposed to be dead, and the dead don't usually offer to show you things unless they're planning to make you join them permanently. Garrett arrived exactly 1 hour later, pulling up in a well-maintained Peterbilt 379 that looked like it had rolled off the showroom floor despite being at least 20 years old. He was a big man, probably 6'4" and built like a linebacker with graying hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He parked his rig and walked over to where Wade and I were standing near the restaurant entrance, keeping a careful distance from my truck. The silhouette was still visible in my sleeper berth window, motionless as a statue. So that's our problem, Garrett said without preamble, nodding toward my truck. How long's it been sitting there like that? About an hour, I replied. Ever since the lights came on. And you're sure you interacted with Marcus at the Ardmore truck stop? If that was Marcus, the guy I talked to matched Wade's description perfectly. Garrett pulled out a small notebook and a pen. Tell me exactly what happened from the moment you pulled into that truck stop. Don't leave out any details, no matter how insignificant they might seem. I recounted my entire experience, the strange, thick feeling in the air that had started after I left the truck stop, the breathing sounds, the whispering, Wade's warning, everything. Garrett listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. You said the clerk's hands were cold when he gave you your change, Garrett said when I finished. How cold? Like he'd been holding ice. I remember thinking it was weird because it was a warm night. And his movements seemed sluggish? Yeah, like he was operating at half speed. But I figured he was just tired. It was late, and working night shift at a truck stop can't be easy. Garrett nodded and made another note. The temperature of the air in your cab, when did that start? Right after I left Ardmore, maybe 10 or 15 minutes down the road. And it only affected the air inside your truck, not outside? Right. Every time I stepped out of the cab, I could breathe normally again. Garrett closed his notebook and looked thoughtfully at my truck. Clint, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound like something out of a horror movie, but I need you to take it seriously. What you're dealing with isn't Marcus's ghost. Then what is it? It's something much older and much more dangerous. Marcus was just the bait. Or, more accurately, the entity is using Marcus's appearance and memories to make itself seem familiar and trustworthy. The real Marcus probably tried to resist when this thing first attached itself to him, which is why Wade got that warning. But eventually it consumed him completely. Wade shifted uncomfortably. Garrett, what kind of entity are we talking about here? The old truckers used to call them road wraiths, parasitic spirits that feed off the life force of long-haul drivers. They're attracted to the loneliness and isolation that comes with spending weeks on the road away from family and friends. Most of the time, they just follow trucks for a few miles, feeding off the driver's emotional energy. But sometimes they get hungry for something more substantial. I felt my blood turn cold. More substantial? They want to possess a living host completely, take over their body, their memories, their entire identity, and they're patient. They'll stalk a potential victim for hundreds of miles, wearing them down psychologically until their defenses are weak enough to breach. Is that what happened to the other drivers? The ones who disappeared? Garrett nodded grimly. Most likely. The entity probably drove their trucks off the road after taking possession, then used their bodies to find new hunting grounds. It could have been wearing dozens of different faces over the years. So why is it using Marcus's appearance specifically? Because Marcus worked at a truck stop, the perfect position to interact with hundreds of potential victims. The entity probably tried to possess him first, but Marcus was stronger than it expected. He managed to resist long enough to die naturally, which left the entity stuck with his appearance but without a physical form. Until now, Wade said quietly. Exactly. It's been using that truck stop as a hunting ground ever since, appearing as Marcus to lure drivers into letting their guard down. Once a driver interacts with it, the entity attaches itself to them and follows them down the road, gradually wearing down their resistance until it can complete the possession. I looked at my truck, where the silhouette was still sitting motionless in the sleeper berth. So what's it waiting for? Why doesn't it just possess me now? Because you're not alone, and you're in a well-lit public place surrounded by other people. These entities prefer isolation. It's easier to break down someone's psychological defenses when they feel cut off from help. It's probably hoping you'll eventually have to get back in your truck and drive somewhere more remote. Well, that's not happening, I said firmly. I'll abandon the load before I get back in that truck with that thing. Actually, Garrett said, I don't think you should abandon your truck. Both Wade and I stared at him. What do you mean? Wade asked. If Clint abandons his truck, the entity will just find another host. It could be weeks or months before it claims another victim, but it will eventually. The only way to stop this cycle is to confront the entity directly and force it to move on. That sounds incredibly dangerous, I said. It is. But Clint, you're the first potential victim who's made it this far without being possessed. Most drivers would have tried to push through, figuring they could outrun whatever was following them. The fact that you recognized the danger and sought help means you might be strong enough to face this thing. What would I have to do? Garrett pulled a small leather pouch from his jacket pocket. This contains salt blessed by a Cherokee medicine man I know in Oklahoma. Salt has been used to repel evil spirits for thousands of years, and the blessing gives it extra potency. If you can get close enough to the entity to throw this salt on it, it should disrupt its connection to our world long enough for it to be forced to move on. Get close enough? You mean I have to go back into my truck? I'm afraid so. The entity won't come out into the open where there are witnesses. You have to confront it in its chosen territory. Wade shook his head. Garrett, that's suicide. The moment Clint steps into that cab, the thing will try to possess him. Not necessarily. The entity has been feeding off Clint's fear and isolation for hours now, gradually building up the psychic energy it needs to attempt a possession. But now Clint knows what he's facing, and he's not alone anymore. That changes the dynamic significantly. How so? Fear and ignorance make us vulnerable to these entities. But knowledge and determination can be powerful weapons against them. If Clint goes in there knowing exactly what he's up against and exactly what he needs to do, the entity will be on the defensive for the first time. I looked at the pouch of blessed salt in Garrett's hand. It seemed ridiculously small and insignificant compared to the supernatural threat waiting in my truck. What if it doesn't work? Then we call 911 and tell them we need an exorcist and a priest, Garrett said with a slight smile. But I've used this method before, Clint. It works, as long as the person wielding the salt has enough willpower to resist the entity's attempts at psychological manipulation. What kind of manipulation? It'll try to confuse you, make you doubt what you're seeing and hearing. It might appear as people you know and trust, trying to trick you into lowering your defenses. It might show you false visions of your past, or threaten you with glimpses of terrible futures. The key is to remember that none of it is real. It's all just the entity trying to break down your mental barriers. I took the pouch of salt, surprised by how heavy it felt for something so small. Anything else I should know? Yes. Once you start the confrontation, you have to see it through to the end. If you try to back out halfway through, the entity will be stronger than ever, and it will definitely possess you. You only get one chance at this. Wade grabbed my arm. Clint, you don't have to do this. We can call the police. Tell them there's been a break-in or something. Get them to search your truck. And what happens when they don't find anything? I still have to drive that truck eventually, and the entity will still be waiting. At least this way, I have a chance to end it. I looked at my truck one more time. The silhouette was still there, patient and motionless. But now that I knew what I was looking at, it seemed less terrifying and more pathetic. A parasitic entity that could only survive by feeding off the fear and loneliness of others. Okay, I said, gripping the pouch of salt tightly. Let's do this. Garrett placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. Remember, the moment you step into that cab, the entity will know you're coming for it. It's going to throw everything it has at you to try to break your resolve. Don't listen to anything it says. Don't believe anything it shows you. And whatever you do, don't let it touch you. Physical contact makes possession much easier. How will I know when the salt has worked? Trust me, you'll know. The entity will either disappear completely or reveal its true form. And its true form isn't something you want to see. Either way, throw the salt and get out of the truck as fast as you can. I started walking toward my truck, the blessed salt clutching in my right hand. With each step, the temperature seemed to drop a few degrees, and the air grew thicker, just like it had been during my drive north from Ardmore. When I reached the driver's side door, I paused and looked back at Wade and Garrett. They were watching intently, ready to call for help if things went wrong. I opened the door and climbed into the cab. The moment I sat down behind the wheel, the entity spoke. "Hello, Clint." The voice came from right behind me, so close I could feel breath on the back of my neck. "I've been waiting for you." I didn't turn around. Instead, I looked in my rearview mirror. The silhouette was no longer sitting on my bunk. It was standing right behind my driver's seat, close enough to touch me. And it was no longer wearing Marcus's face. What I saw in that mirror was something that had never been human at all. A tall, gaunt figure with pale, mottled skin and eyes like black holes. Its mouth was too wide, filled with too many teeth, and when it smiled, I could see that some of those teeth were broken and yellowed with age. But worse than its appearance was the aura of wrongness that surrounded it. An overwhelming sense that this thing didn't belong in our world, that its very presence was a violation of natural law. "Do you like what you see, Clint?" it asked, and now its voice sounded nothing like Marcus. It was hollow, echoing, like someone speaking from the bottom of a deep well. "This is what I really am, what I've always been." I gripped the pouch of salt tighter, trying to summon the courage to turn around and face the entity directly. But Garrett had warned me not to let it touch me, and in the confined space of the truck cab, avoiding physical contact would be nearly impossible. "You don't have to be afraid," the entity continued. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to share your body for a while. You'll still be you, mostly. I'll just be along for the ride, helping you make better decisions, keeping you company during those long, lonely hours on the road." "I know what you are," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "You're a parasite. You feed off drivers' life force until there's nothing left of them." The entity laughed, a sound like broken glass scraping against concrete. "Is that what the old man told you? How dramatic. The truth is much simpler, Clint. I don't destroy my hosts. I improve them. I make them stronger, more focused, more efficient. The drivers I've shared bodies with have made more money and covered more miles than they ever did on their own." "Then where are they now? Why haven't any of them been seen since they disappeared?" "Who says they've disappeared? Lance is still driving. Made it all the way to Alaska last month. Frank's been hauling freight in the Pacific Northwest. They're all still out there, still trucking, just better than they were before." As the entity spoke, I caught glimpses of images in my peripheral vision. Trucks driving through scenic landscapes, drivers who looked happy and prosperous, bank statements showing large deposits. But I remembered Garrett's warning about false visions and forced myself not to look directly at them. "You're lying," I said. "Am I? Look in your mirror, Clint. Look at yourself. When's the last time you were truly happy? When's the last time you felt like your life had meaning beyond just moving freight from one place to another?" Against my better judgment, I glanced at my reflection in the rearview mirror. For a split second, I saw myself as I really was. A lonely, middle-aged man with crow's feet around his eyes and gray creeping into his beard. A man whose ex-wife had left him because she couldn't compete with his love affair with the open road. But then the reflection changed. I saw myself as I could be, younger, happier, more confident. I saw myself walking into a house where a beautiful woman waited for me with a warm smile and open arms. I saw bank accounts with six-figure balances, fancy trucks with custom paint jobs, respect from other drivers who looked up to me as a legend in the industry. "I can give you all of that," the entity whispered. "All you have to do is let me in. Stop fighting, stop resisting, and let me make your life everything it should have been." The visions were incredibly seductive, showing me possibilities I'd given up on years ago. For a moment, I almost believed them. Almost. But then I remembered the silhouette I'd seen in my sleeper berth. Motionless, patient, waiting. That wasn't the posture of something that wanted to improve my life. That was the posture of a predator stalking its prey. "Show me Lance," I said suddenly. "What?" "You said Lance is still driving, still alive. Show me Lance. Let me talk to him." The entity was quiet for several seconds. "That's not how it works. Once the merger is complete, the original personality becomes integrated with mine. Lance is still there, but he's part of something larger now." "You mean he's dead?" "Death is such a limited concept, Clint. What I offer is transformation, evolution, a chance to become something more than just another lonely trucker grinding out miles for a paycheck." I could feel the entity moving closer behind me, though I hadn't heard any sound of footsteps. The temperature in the cab was dropping rapidly now, and frost was beginning to form on the inside of my windows. "Last chance, Clint. Accept my offer willingly, and the transition will be painless. Fight me and, well, let's just say it will be much more unpleasant for both of us." That's when I made my move. I spun around in my seat and threw the pouch of blessed salt directly at the entity's chest. The small leather bag burst open on impact, sending white crystals flying through the air. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The entity let out a shriek that sounded like a steam locomotive's whistle mixed with a human scream. Its form began to flicker and distort, like a TV with bad reception. Where the salt had struck it, its pale skin was smoking and bubbling as if the crystals were made of acid. "You fool!" it howled. "You have no idea what you've done. I was offering you immortality." "I don't want your kind of immortality," I said, backing toward the driver's side door. The entity's form was becoming less solid by the second, but it was also becoming more desperate. It lunged toward me, its clawed hands reaching for my throat. I threw myself backward out of the cab, landing hard on the asphalt parking lot. Behind me, I could hear the entity's screams growing fainter and more distorted. Wade and Garrett came running over as I picked myself up off the ground. "Did it work?" Wade asked. I looked back at my truck. The interior lights were flickering rapidly, like a strobe light, and I could see shadows moving chaotically inside the cab. But even as we watched, the flickering began to slow, and the shadows grew fainter. Finally, the lights went out completely, and the truck was silent. "It's gone," Garrett said with satisfaction. "The salt disrupted its connection to our world. It's been forced to move on." "Move on where?" "Hopefully somewhere far from any major trucking routes. These entities usually retreat to remote areas to recover after being banished. With any luck, it'll be decades before it's strong enough to try this again." I walked cautiously back to my truck and peered through the driver's side window. The cab looked completely normal. No signs of the supernatural confrontation that had just taken place. Even the frost on the windows was gone. I opened the door and climbed back into the cab. The air felt normal again. No thick, oppressive feeling, no sense of an unwelcome presence, just the familiar comfort of my own truck. "How do I know it's really gone?" I asked Garrett. "Start her up. If the entity was still here, you'd know it immediately." I turned the key, and my diesel engine roared to life with its usual healthy rumble. The gauges all showed normal readings, and when I switched on my CB radio, I heard nothing but the usual trucker chatter from Channel 19. "Looks like you're good to go," Garrett said, climbing up onto my running board. "But Clint, I want you to promise me something." "What's that?" "If you ever encounter anything like this again, any strange sounds, weird feelings, unexplained phenomena, don't try to tough it out on your own. Call me immediately." He handed me a business card with his contact information. "I've made it my business to help drivers deal with the supernatural side of trucking, and I'm always available." "How often does this kind of thing happen?" "More often than you'd think. America's highways are old, and some of them have accumulated things over the decades. Spirits, entities, memories of tragic events. Most of the time they're harmless, but occasionally something like what you just faced decides to make trouble. Wade leaned against my truck. Clint, what are you going to do about your load? You're already hours behind schedule. I looked at my GPS display. It was nearly 3 a.m., and I still had over 600 miles to go to reach Minneapolis. Under normal circumstances, I would have been panicking about the delay. But after what I'd just been through, meeting a delivery schedule seemed like the least important thing in the world. I'm going to drive straight through, I said. And when I deliver this load, I'm going to call my dispatcher and take some time off. Maybe visit my ex-wife, see if we can work things out. That sounds like a good plan, Garrett said. Just remember, life's too short to spend it all alone on the road. Make sure you've got people who care about you, people you can call when things get dark. Isolation is what makes us vulnerable to entities like the one you just faced. I shook hands with both men and thanked them for their help. As they walked back to their own trucks, I sat in my cab for a moment, appreciating the simple pleasure of being alone without feeling threatened. Then I put my truck in gear and pulled back onto I-35, heading north toward Minneapolis, and what I hoped would be a much more ordinary end to an extraordinary night. Behind me, the truck stop grew smaller in my mirrors, until it was just a glow on the horizon. But I carried with me the memory of what I'd learned, that the highways of America held dangers I'd never imagined, but also that there were people out there willing to help drivers face those dangers. And most importantly, I'd learned that some things were worth more than money or schedule compliance. Things like coming home alive and having someone who'd be glad to see you when you did. 3 months later, I was driving the same route from Houston to Minneapolis, hauling another load of oil field equipment. I'd requested this specific run from my dispatcher, despite having other options that would have taken me through different states entirely. I told myself I was just being practical. It was good money, and I knew the route well. But the truth was, I needed to prove to myself that I could drive this highway without fear. That one supernatural encounter hadn't broken my confidence as a trucker. I'd taken Garrett's advice and spent those 3 months reconnecting with people. I'd visited my ex-wife, Linda, twice, and we'd had some good conversations about what had gone wrong between us and whether there might be a future worth exploring. I'd also started calling my brother Dale more regularly, something I hadn't done in years. The isolation that had made me vulnerable to the road wraith was slowly being replaced by genuine human connections. I felt stronger, more grounded, more like the man I used to be before decades of long-haul trucking had worn down my social skills. But despite all those positive changes, I was still nervous as I approached the Ardmore truck stop around 11 p.m. on a Thursday night in June. I had deliberately planned my fuel stop for daylight hours, but traffic delays and a breakdown outside Dallas had pushed my schedule back by nearly 6 hours. Now I was faced with the same choice I'd made 3 months earlier: fuel up at Ardmore after dark, or detour significantly to find another truck stop. This time, I chose to detour. I took the next exit and drove 15 miles east to a truck stop I'd never used before. It was smaller than the Ardmore location, with older pumps and a convenience store that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1990s. But it was brightly lit, busy with other truckers, and most importantly, it didn't have any supernatural history that I knew of. I fueled up without incident, bought a sandwich and coffee, and was back on the road within 20 minutes. The detour had cost me some time and mileage, but the peace of mind was worth it, or so I thought. I was about 50 miles north of the detour when I first noticed something was wrong. It started with the air in the cab again. That same thick, oppressive feeling I'd experienced 3 months earlier. But this time it was worse, more intense, as if the atmosphere itself was pressing down on me from all sides. My first thought was that I'd picked up some kind of contaminated fuel at the truck stop, but my engine was running normally, and the thick feeling was only affecting the air inside my cab, not outside. Then I heard the breathing, It was unmistakable this time. Slow, deliberate inhalations and exhalations coming from my sleeper berth. But there was something different about the rhythm. 3 months ago, the breathing had been steady and patient, like something at rest. Now it sounded labored, angry, as if whatever was making the sound was struggling or in pain. I grabbed my CB radio and immediately called Garrett. "Garrett, this is Clint. I've got a problem." His voice came back immediately, as if he'd been waiting for my call. "Clint, where are you?" "I-35 northbound, about mile marker 110. The breathing is back, but it's different this time. Angrier." "Did you fuel up at Ardmore?" "No, I specifically avoided that truck stop. Went to a place about 15 miles east instead." There was a pause. "Clint, describe the breathing. Is it the same rhythm as before?" I listened carefully. "No, it's faster. More aggressive. Like whatever's making the sound is pissed off about something." "That's what I was afraid of. The entity you banished 3 months ago. It's back. And it's not happy about what you did to it." My blood ran cold. "I thought you said it would be decades before it was strong enough to try again." "That's what usually happens. But you humiliated this particular entity, forced it to retreat in front of witnesses. Entities like this one have enormous egos, and being banished by a mere human is the ultimate insult. It's probably spent the last 3 months feeding off other sources, building up enough power to come after you specifically." "How is that possible?" "I avoided the truck stop where it was anchored." "Because it's not anchored to the truck stop anymore, Clint. It's anchored to you. The moment you entered its territory and survived its first possession attempt, you became connected to it. Think of it like a supernatural blood feud. It won't rest until it either possesses you or destroys you." Through my CB speaker, I could hear the sound of Garrett's truck engine starting up. "Where are you?" I asked. "About 2 hours south of your position, but I'm heading your way. Clint, whatever you do, don't stop driving. Keep moving. Stay on well-lit highways with plenty of traffic. This entity is much stronger than it was before, and it's not going to play games this time." The breathing behind me was getting louder, more pronounced. And now I could hear something else mixed in with it. A low, barely audible growling sound, like an animal preparing to attack. "Garrett, I don't think I can wait 2 hours. This thing sounds like it's getting ready to make its move. Then you need to get off the highway immediately. Find the busiest, most public place you can. A truck stop, a 24-hour restaurant, anywhere with lots of people and bright lights. These entities are much weaker when they're surrounded by crowds." I checked my GPS for the nearest exit with services. There was a large truck stop about 10 miles ahead, one of the major chains that stayed busy around the clock. If I could make it that far. That's when the entity spoke. "You can't run from me forever, Clint." The voice was the same hollow, echoing sound I'd heard 3 months ago, but now it was filled with rage. "You embarrassed me, made me look weak in front of the others. Do you have any idea how long it took me to rebuild my strength after what you did?" I didn't answer, but pressed harder on the accelerator. My speedometer climbed to 80, then 85 miles per hour. "I've been watching you, Clint. Following you. I know about your visits with Linda. I know about your phone calls with your brother. Such a touching attempt at redemption. But it won't save you." The temperature in the cab began to drop rapidly. Frost started forming on my windows despite the warm June night outside. "You think having friends makes you stronger? Think having people who care about you makes you immune to what I can do? Let me show you how wrong you are." Suddenly, my CB radio crackled to life, but the voice coming through wasn't Garrett's. It was Linda's. "Clint? Clint, can you hear me? I'm trapped. There's something in my house, something that came looking for you. It's going to kill me unless you come back and face it yourself." I grabbed the radio handset. "Linda, how are you on my CB frequency?" "I don't know how, Clint. All I know is that this thing, this creature, it's been stalking me ever since your last visit. It knows you care about me, and it's using that against you. Please, you have to help me." Behind me, the entity laughed. "Go ahead, Clint. Call your ex-wife. Ask her if she's in any danger. But remember, while you're wasting time on a phone call, I'm getting stronger and angrier." I pulled out my cell phone and dialed Linda's number. It rang twice before she answered. "Hello? Linda, it's Clint. Are you okay? Are you safe?" "Of course I'm safe. Clint, it's almost midnight. Is everything all right? You sound scared." I looked at my CB radio, where Linda's voice was still pleading for help. But the woman on my cell phone sounded completely normal, slightly confused by my late-night call, but obviously not in any danger. "The CB radio," I said to the entity. "You're creating false voices." "Very good, Clint. Yes, I can mimic anyone you care about. Would you like to hear from your brother Dale? Maybe your old friend Wade?" The CB erupted with familiar voices. Dale calling for help, Wade screaming in pain, even Garrett pleading with me to turn around and come back to save him. But they were all fake, all illusions created by the entity to confuse and manipulate me. I turned off the CB radio completely. "That won't help," the entity snarled. "I don't need the radio to get inside your head." The frost on my windows was spreading now, creating intricate patterns that looked almost like writing. As I watched, words began to form in the ice. "You can't escape, nowhere to run. I own you now." I forced myself to focus on driving, to ignore the entity's psychological warfare. The truck stop was only 5 miles away now. If I could just make it that far. But the entity wasn't finished with its games. In my rearview mirror, I saw movement in the sleeper berth. The curtain was being pulled aside, and a figure was emerging into the cab area behind me. But it wasn't the gaunt, monstrous form I'd seen 3 months ago. It was me. Or rather, it was a perfect duplicate of me, dressed in the same clothes I was wearing, with the same face and build. The only difference was the eyes. Where mine were brown, the duplicate's eyes were solid black, like looking into empty space. "Hello, Clint," my duplicate said, settling into the passenger seat. "Don't I look familiar?" I kept my eyes on the road, refusing to look directly at the thing wearing my face. "This is what I'm going to look like when I possess your body," it continued conversationally. "Your friends and family will never know the difference. I'll visit Linda, call your brother, maybe even get back together with your ex-wife. Won't that be nice? She'll think she's got the new, improved Clint back in her life." "You're not real," I said through gritted teeth. "Oh, but I am. This is your future, Clint. This is what's going to happen whether you fight me or not. The only question is whether you make it easy on yourself or not." The truck stop appeared ahead, its bright lights cutting through the darkness like a beacon. I had never been so happy to see a Flying J logo in my entire life. But as I approached the off-ramp, something went wrong with my truck. The steering wheel began to fight me, trying to turn to the left toward oncoming traffic. My accelerator stopped responding to pressure, then began accelerating on its own. My brakes felt spongy and ineffective when I tried to slow down. The entity was taking control of my truck. "You're not stopping there, Clint," my duplicate said with a smile that was a twisted version of my own. "We're going to keep driving until we find somewhere nice and isolated where we can complete our business in private." I fought the steering wheel with all my strength, but it was like trying to wrestle with something 10 times stronger than me. The truck shot past the off-ramp at nearly 90 miles per hour, heading into the empty darkness of rural Oklahoma. "That's better," the entity said. "Just you and me and miles of empty highway. No one to interrupt us this time." In the distance behind us, I could see headlights approaching fast, a truck running much faster than the speed limit, trying to catch up. It had to be Garrett, but he was still miles away. "Your friend won't make it in time," the entity said, following my gaze in the mirror. In fact, let me make sure he doesn't interfere at all." The duplicate reached over and grabbed the steering wheel, yanking it hard to the right. My truck veered off the highway and onto the shoulder, gravel spraying from under the tires as we plowed through the grass median and into the southbound lanes. Now we were heading directly toward Garrett's oncoming headlights. "Stop!" I shouted, fighting to regain control of the wheel. "You'll kill us both." "Death is just another form of possession," the entity laughed, "and much more permanent." The distance between us and Garrett's truck was closing rapidly. In seconds, we would collide head-on at a combined speed of over 150 miles per hour. But then I remembered something Garrett had told me 3 months ago. Fear and ignorance make us vulnerable to these entities, but knowledge and determination can be powerful weapons against them. This entity was trying to use my own fear against me, making me believe it had more power than it actually possessed. But if it was really strong enough to control my truck completely, why did it need to possess me at all? Why not just take over the truck and drive it wherever it wanted? Because it couldn't maintain that level of control for long. It was bluffing, using its remaining strength to create one final illusion of power. Instead of fighting the steering wheel, I let go of it completely. "What are you doing?" the duplicate demanded. "Calling your bluff," I said calmly. Without my resistance to fight against, the entity's control over the steering wheel faltered. The truck began to drift back toward the right side of the highway, the wheels finding the familiar groove of the travel lane. At the last second, I grabbed the wheel and steered us back into the northbound lanes, missing Garrett's truck by mere inches. The entity let out a howl of rage and frustration. "You can't resist me forever! I'll follow you to the ends of the earth!" "No, you won't," I said, reaching into my glove compartment. 3 months ago, after my encounter with the road wraith, Garrett had given me a backup supply of blessed salt, just in case. I'd carried it with me on every run since then, hoping I'd never need to use it. Now I pulled out the small pouch and held it up so the duplicate could see it. "You want to possess me so badly? Come and get me." The duplicate lunged across the cab, its hands reaching for my throat. But the moment it made contact with the blessed salt, its form began to dissolve. This time, there was no dramatic shrieking or visible smoke. The entity simply faded away, like a photograph left too long in sunlight. The duplicate's face became transparent, then translucent, then disappeared entirely. The thick feeling in the air evaporated instantly. The frost on my windows melted away. The oppressive sense of being watched vanished completely. But most importantly, I could no longer hear breathing from my sleeper berth. My CB radio crackled back to life. "Clint, this is Garrett. Are you okay? I saw your truck swerve into oncoming traffic back there." I grabbed the handset with shaking hands. "I'm okay, Garrett. The entity is gone. Really gone this time." "Are you sure?" I listened carefully to the sounds in my cab, engine noise, road noise, the hum of my air conditioning. Nothing else. "I'm sure. Whatever connection it had to me, I think I broke it when I called its bluff about controlling my truck." "Good man. These entities are all about psychological manipulation. Once you stop being afraid of them, they lose most of their power." I pulled over at the next exit and waited for Garrett to catch up. When he arrived, we inspected my truck thoroughly, inside and out. There were no signs of supernatural interference, no residual traces of the entity's presence. "I think you're free and clear this time," Garrett said. "But Clint, I want you to understand something. The reason this entity was able to come back and target you specifically is because you returned to its hunting ground. These things have long memories, and they hold grudges. So I can never drive through Oklahoma again? You can drive through Oklahoma all you want. Just avoid fueling up at truck stops after dark, unless you absolutely have to. And if you ever encounter anything supernatural again, don't try to handle it alone. Call me immediately." I promised I would, and we parted ways. I continued north to Minneapolis, delivered my load on schedule, and drove home to Indiana feeling like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. But the entity's words about following me to the ends of the earth stayed with me. How could I be sure it was really gone? How could I know it wouldn't find some other way to come after me? The answer came 2 weeks later when I received a call from Wade.
Clint, I've got some news about that truck stop in Ardmore. They're tearing it down. What do you mean? Corporate decided to close it permanently. Too many complaints from drivers about strange experiences, too much negative publicity. They're demolishing the building and selling the land to a solar energy company. I felt a surge of relief. Does that mean the entity is gone for good? Garrett thinks so. Without its original anchor point, it'll have to find somewhere else to establish a new hunting ground. And after being banished twice, it's probably too weak to try again for many years. What about Marcus, the clerk who died there? Garrett says Marcus's spirit was probably released when the entity was banished the second time. He's finally at peace. I hung up the phone feeling like a chapter of my life had finally closed. The road wraith that had terrorized me and countless other drivers was gone, its supernatural anchor point destroyed. But I also knew that America's highways held other dangers, other entities that preyed on lonely truckers traveling through the darkness. The supernatural side of trucking that Garrett had introduced me to wasn't going away just because I'd defeated one particular threat. From now on, I would drive with greater awareness of what might be lurking in the shadows alongside our nation's interstates. I would carry blessed salt on every run, maintain my connections with family and friends, and never again make the mistake of thinking I was completely safe just because I was in a familiar truck on a familiar road. Because the highways of America are old and long, and some of the things that travel them have been here much longer than any of us. The best we can do is watch out for each other, share our stories, and remember that no driver, living or dead, should have to face the darkness alone. Even now, years later, I still take the same route from Houston to Minneapolis regularly. But I always fuel up during daylight hours. I always carry Garrett's blessed salt. And I always call Linda when I reach my destination to let her know I arrived safely. Because some lessons are worth remembering, and some victories are worth protecting. The road goes on forever, but so does the brotherhood of drivers who travel it. And as long as we look out for each other, no supernatural entity, no matter how old, how hungry, or how determined, will ever claim another victim without a fight. That's a promise I intend to keep for as long as I'm behind the wheel. My name's Vernon Kowalski, and I've been running freight across the American Southwest for 26 years now. Started when I was fresh out of high school in 1998, young and stupid enough to think that driving a truck across the desert would be some kind of romantic adventure. Turned out to be a lot more work and a lot less glamorous than I'd imagined. But it's honest work that pays the bills. And after all these years, I can't imagine doing anything else. I specialize in runs between Phoenix and Little Rock, a route that takes me straight across Arizona, New Mexico, and Arkansas on Interstate 40. It's not the most scenic drive in the world, especially through the desert stretches, but it's steady work with good pay, and I know every truck stop, every way station, and every decent place to grab a meal between the two cities. Or at least I thought I did, until what happened in September of 2020 changed everything I thought I knew about that familiar stretch of highway. I was hauling a load of automotive parts from a warehouse in Tempe to a distribution center outside Little Rock. Standard cargo, nothing unusual about the manifest or the delivery schedule. The load was legal weight, properly secured, and the customer wasn't in any particular hurry, so I planned to take my time and drive safely. I rolled out of Phoenix around 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, timing my departure to miss the worst of the desert heat. September in Arizona is still brutal, with daytime temperatures regularly hitting 105 degrees, but at least the nights start cooling off a little compared to the summer months. The first part of the trip went exactly as planned. I made good time through Arizona,
stopped for fuel and a quick meal in Flagstaff, and crossed into New Mexico around mid-afternoon. The landscape along I-40 through northern Arizona and New Mexico is some of the most beautiful in the country. Red rock formations, ancient mesas, vast expanses of high desert that stretch to the horizon in every direction. But it's also some of the loneliest. Once you get away from the major cities, you can drive for hours without seeing another vehicle, let alone any signs of human habitation. Just you, your truck, and endless miles of desert under a sky so big it makes you feel like an ant crawling across the floor of the universe. I'd always enjoyed that solitude. There's something peaceful about driving through country that hasn't changed much in thousands of years, where the biggest sounds are the rumble of your engine and the whisper of wind across the high desert. It gives you time to think, to process whatever's going on in your life without the constant distractions of civilization. But on this particular trip, the solitude felt different somehow. More watchful. Like the empty landscape was paying attention to me in a way it never had before. I tried to shake off the feeling as I drove east through New Mexico, telling myself I was just being paranoid. Long-haul trucking can mess with your head if you let it, especially on routes where you spend hours at a time without seeing another human being. Your imagination starts working overtime, finding patterns and meanings in things that are perfectly ordinary. As the sun began to set behind me, painting the desert sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, I started looking for a place to stop for the night. I prefer to avoid driving through the desert in total darkness when I can help it. Too many animals on the road, too many chances for something to go wrong when you're miles from help. According to my GPS, there was a truck stop coming up in about 20 miles, just outside a small town called Grants, New Mexico. I'd stopped there before on previous runs. Nothing fancy, but clean restrooms, decent food, and safe parking for the night. Perfect for what I needed. But when I pulled off I-40 at the Grants exit, something immediately struck me as wrong. The truck stop was there, all right. Same building, same sign, same layout I remembered from previous visits. But it was completely empty. Not just quiet, but abandoned looking, as if it had been closed for months. The parking lot, which should have been busy with trucks at this time of evening, was completely deserted. No vehicles at all, not even any abandoned cars or maintenance equipment. The diesel pumps were dark, their digital displays blank. The main building was unlit except for a few security lights that cast eerie shadows across the empty pavement. I sat in my truck for several minutes, trying to figure out what was going on. Had the truck stop gone out of business? But there were no for sale or closed signs anywhere. The building looked like it was in decent repair, and the parking lot was clean and free of debris. Maybe they were just having electrical problems, or the owner had decided to close early for some reason. These things happen with smaller truck stops. They don't always have the resources to stay open 24/7 like the major chains. I was about to put my truck back in gear and look for another place to stop when I noticed something that made me pause. There were lights on in the building after all. Not the bright fluorescent lighting you'd expect in an active truck stop, but a warm, yellowish glow coming from what looked like the restaurant area. Someone was definitely inside. I decided to check it out. Even if they were closed for business, maybe whoever was still there could direct me to another truck stop nearby. It was worth a try anyway. I parked my rig near the building and walked toward the main entrance. As I got closer, I could see more details through the windows. The restaurant area was indeed lit up, and I could make out tables and chairs arranged normally, as if the place was ready for customers. But I still couldn't see any people. The front door was unlocked, which seemed odd if they were closed. I pushed it open and stepped inside, expecting to hear the usual truck stop sounds, maybe a TV playing in the background, the hum of refrigeration units, the clatter of dishes being washed. Instead, I heard whispers. They were so faint at first that I thought it might just be the air conditioning system or some other mechanical noise. but as I stood still and listened more carefully, I could tell that's not what it was. These were definitely human voices, multiple people speaking in hushed tones, too quiet for me to make out individual words, but clearly having some kind of conversation. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. "Anyone here? Are you still open for business?" The whispering stopped immediately, replaced by complete silence. I waited for someone to answer, but no one did. The truck stop felt completely deserted again, as if the voices I'd heard had been my imagination. "Look, I'm not trying to cause trouble," I said to the empty room. "I'm just a trucker looking for a place to fuel up and maybe grab some dinner. If you're closed, just let me know and I'll find somewhere else." Still no response. I walked further into the building, past the convenience store shelves that were fully stocked with the usual truck stop merchandise: energy drinks, snacks, trucking supplies, souvenirs. Everything looked normal and well maintained, as if customers had been shopping there just hours ago. But there was no one behind the counter, no cash register sounds, no signs of recent activity. The restaurant area was even stranger. Tables were set with clean placemats and silverware, as if they were expecting diners to arrive at any moment. The coffee machines were on, and I could smell fresh brewed coffee in the air. But every table was empty, every chair pushed in neatly. It felt like walking into a movie set, everything arranged to look normal and inviting, but with all the people mysteriously absent. That's when I heard the whispers again. This time they were coming from the back of the restaurant, maybe from the kitchen area. Still too quiet to understand, but definitely multiple voices having some kind of urgent conversation. The tone sounded conspiratorial, like people sharing secrets they didn't want overheard. I walked toward the sound, past empty booths and unoccupied tables. "Hello? I can hear you back there. I'm not trying to eavesdrop. I just want to know if you're still serving food." The whispers got slightly louder as I approached the kitchen, but I still couldn't make out individual words. It sounded like maybe 3 or 4 people talking at once, their voices overlapping in a way that made it impossible to follow any single conversation. I pushed through the swinging doors that separated the restaurant from the kitchen area, expecting to find the staff having some kind of meeting or discussion. The kitchen was completely empty. I stood there for a long moment, looking around at the clean prep surfaces, the idle cooking equipment, the empty space where I was absolutely certain I'd heard multiple people whispering just seconds before. But there was no one there, no back exit that anyone could have used to slip out, no walk-in cooler or storage room where they might be hiding. Just an empty, silent kitchen that showed no signs of recent use. "This is getting weird," I muttered to myself. That's when I heard my name. "Vernon." It was barely audible, more like a breath than a spoken word, but it was definitely my name. Someone in this empty truck stop knew who I was. I spun around, looking for the source of the voice, but I was still alone in the kitchen. "Vernon," came the whisper again, and this time I could tell it was coming from the restaurant area I'd just left. I pushed back through the swinging doors and found myself facing the same empty dining room. But now, the whispering was all around me, coming from every direction at once. "Vernon! Vernon! Vernon!" Multiple voices, all saying my name in that same barely audible whisper. Not threatening exactly, but insistent, like they were trying to get my attention for something important. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice louder than I'd intended. "How do you know my name?" The whispers stopped, and for a moment the truck stop was completely silent again. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. The sound of chairs scraping against the floor, as if people were standing up from the tables all around me. But I could see the tables. They were all still empty. I backed toward the front entrance, keeping my eyes on the restaurant area. The chair scraping sounds continued, getting louder and more numerous. as if dozens of invisible people were rising from their seats and moving around the dining room.
Vernon, don't leave.
This whisper was different, clearer, more distinct than the others, and it was coming from directly behind me. I spun around and found myself face to face with the most normal-looking person I'd ever seen. He was maybe 45 years old, average height and build, wearing the kind of plain khaki uniform you'd expect to see on a truck stop employee. He had a friendly face and tired eyes, like someone who'd been working a long shift but was still trying to be helpful to customers. But there was something wrong with him, something I couldn't quite put my finger on, but that made every instinct in my body scream, "Get away from here!"
Sorry about the confusion,
he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes.
We're having some electrical problems tonight. Most of our lights are out, and it's been playing havoc with our phone system.
I was hearing whispers, I said, still backing toward the door. Lots of people whispering my name.
Oh, that.
He waved dismissively. That's just the radio in the back office. Sometimes it picks up CB chatter from trucks on the highway. You'd be amazed how many truckers talk to themselves while they're driving.
It was a reasonable explanation, except for one problem. The voices had known my name. CB radio chatter wouldn't explain that.
Look, I don't want to cause any trouble, I said. I was just looking for a place to fuel up and get some dinner. If you're having problems... No problems at all, the man said, his smile getting wider. We're fully operational. Fuel pumps are working fine, kitchen's open, got plenty of parking spaces available. In fact, you're our only customer tonight, so we can give you our full attention.
Everything he was saying sounded normal and helpful, but something about his tone made it sound like a threat rather than good customer service.
Actually, I just remembered I need to make a delivery tonight, I lied. I should probably keep driving.
Are you sure?
It's getting pretty dark out there, and you've got a long way to go before the next truck stop. Wouldn't want you to get stranded somewhere if your truck broke down.
How did he know I had a long way to go? I hadn't told him where I was headed.
Thanks for the offer, but I'll be fine, I said, reaching for the door handle.
Vernon,
he said quietly, and something about the way he said my name made me freeze.
Are you sure you want to leave? We've been waiting for you.
Waiting for me?
For a very long time, and there's so much we want to show you.
As he spoke, the whispers started again, but now they were louder and more distinct. I could make out individual phrases.
Stay with us, Vernon. Don't leave us alone. We have so many stories to tell. So many secrets to share.
The voices were coming from all around me, but when I looked around the restaurant, I still couldn't see anyone except the man in the khaki uniform. But now I could tell that the empty chairs were moving. Not dramatically, but small shifts and adjustments, as if invisible people were settling into them.
Who are you people?
I asked.
We're travelers, just like you, the man said. Truckers who stopped here for fuel and food and decided to stay a while. It gets lonely on the road, Vernon. You know that better than most. Wouldn't it be nice to have some company for a change? People who understand what it's like to spend weeks at a time driving through empty country with no one to talk to? The idea was seductive, I had to admit. The loneliness of long-haul trucking was something I'd learned to live with, but that didn't mean I enjoyed it. Having people to talk to share stories with, to just be around, it sounded appealing. But everything about this situation felt wrong. The empty truck stop, the whispers, the way this man seemed to know things about me he shouldn't know.
Thanks, but I really do need to get back on the road, I said, turning the door handle.
The door wouldn't budge. I pushed harder, then tried pulling instead of pushing. The door was locked, or stuck, or somehow sealed shut.
Vernon,
the man said, and now his friendly expression was fading into something colder.
I really think you should stay. We insist.
Behind him,
The whispers were getting louder and more insistent.
Stay, Vernon. Join us, Vernon. Become one of us, Vernon.
I looked around the restaurant and realized I could finally see them. Not clearly, but like shapes made of smoke and shadow sitting at the tables and standing in the aisles. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all watching me with what felt like desperate hunger. And I understood what this place really was. It wasn't a truck stop at all. It was a trap. I yanked on the door handle with all my strength, but it wouldn't move. It was as if the door had been welded shut, or maybe as if the building itself was refusing to let me leave.
There's no need to be afraid, Vernon,
the man in the khaki uniform said, his voice taking on a hypnotic quality.
We're all friends here, all fellow travelers who found a place where we can rest, where we don't have to be alone anymore.
What are you? I asked, backing away from the door and looking around at the shadowy figures that were becoming more visible by the second.
We're truckers, just like you, he replied. Drivers who spent years, decades crossing this desert alone.
Do you know how isolating that can be, Vernon? How it eats away at your soul, mile after mile with nothing but the road and your own thoughts for company? As he spoke, the shadowy figures began to take on more definite shapes. I could make out the details now. Men and women in various styles of clothing that spanned different decades. Some wore modern trucker gear, but others were dressed in fashions from the 80s, 70s, even earlier. Their faces were pale and indistinct, but their eyes were bright and fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl.
We found each other here, the man continued.
This place called to us, offered us what we'd been searching for all those years on the road. Community, fellowship, an end to the loneliness. By trapping people? I said, still trying to find another way out of the building. By offering them a choice. Stay and be part of something larger than yourself, or continue driving those empty highways until the isolation drives you mad. One of the shadowy figures stood up from a nearby table, a woman in what looked like trucker gear from the 1990s. When she spoke, her voice had the same whispery quality I'd been hearing since I entered the building.
I drove for 15 years,
she said, her words barely audible but clearly understandable. 15 years of eating alone, sleeping alone, talking to myself just to hear a human voice. When I found this place, when I found these people, it was like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. But you're dead, I said, though I wasn't sure how I knew that. You're all dead.
Death is just another word for transformation, the man in khaki said. We've moved beyond the limitations of physical existence. We don't need food, we don't need sleep, we don't feel pain or exhaustion. We just have each other, and the stories we share, and the endless conversation that makes existence meaningful. More figures were standing up now, moving closer to where I stood near the door. Their whispers filled the air, overlapping and intertwining. Join us, Vernon. No more lonely nights. No more empty highways. No more driving until your back aches and your eyes burn. We can take away the pain of solitude. Their words were seductive, playing on every complaint I'd ever had about life as a long-haul trucker. The loneliness was real. After 26 years on the road, I'd grown used to it. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt sometimes. The idea of never being alone again, of having constant companionship and conversation, was tempting. But everything about this situation screamed danger. These weren't people offering friendship. They were predators offering a trap disguised as salvation. What happened to your bodies? I asked, trying to buy time while I figured out how to escape. What do bodies matter when you have eternity? The woman replied. Physical forms are just prisons that keep us trapped in a limited existence. Here, we can be what we really are, pure consciousness, free to explore the depths of thought and memory and experience.
Our trucks are still parked outside, said another voice, this one belonging to a man in clothing that looked like it was from the 1960s.
Still waiting for drivers who will never return to them. But we don't need trucks anymore. We don't need to haul freight or meet delivery schedules or worry about DOT regulations. We're free. I looked through the window toward the parking lot, but it was too dark to see anything clearly. If there really were abandoned trucks out there,
They weren't visible from inside the building.
"Vernon," the man in khaki said, stepping closer,
You've spent your entire adult life driving back and forth across this desert. The same routes, the same truck stops, the same endless miles of asphalt. What has it gotten you? A few dollars in your bank account? A reputation as a reliable driver? Meanwhile, life has passed you by. You've missed weddings and birthdays and funerals because you were always on the road. You've watched your friends settle down and start families while you remained alone with your truck. His words hit uncomfortably close to home. I had missed a lot of important events over the years, choosing work over relationships, the highway over human connection. It was the price of being a long-haul trucker, something every driver had to accept. But it was still a choice I'd made freely, and I wasn't ready to give up my freedom just to avoid loneliness. What happens if I say no? I asked. The man's friendly expression hardened. Why would you say no? What's out there for you, Vernon? Another 20 years of the same routine? Another 2 decades of eating truck stop food and sleeping in uncomfortable bunks and making small talk with strangers at fuel islands?
"At least it's my life," I said. "My choice. Is it really? Or are you just too afraid to take the step that would free you from all that pain?" The whispers around me grew louder and more insistent.
Stay with us, Vernon. Don't go back to that lonely existence. We can give you everything you've been missing. All you have to do is let go. As they spoke, I felt something strange happening to my mind. The constant worry about schedules and deadlines was fading away. The ache in my lower back from years of sitting in a driver's seat was disappearing. The loneliness that had been my constant companion for so long was being replaced by a warm sense of belonging. It would be so easy to just give in, to stop fighting and become part of this strange community of lost souls. No more long nights driving through empty desert. No more truck stop meals eaten in silence. No more going weeks at a time without a meaningful conversation with another human being. But then, I remembered something my father had told me years ago, back when I was first considering becoming a trucker. "Son," he'd said, "freedom isn't about avoiding discomfort. It's about having the right to choose your own discomfort." The loneliness of the road was my discomfort, but it was also my choice. And these things were trying to take that choice away from me. I shook my head, trying to clear away the mental fog that had been creeping over me. "No, I'm not staying here." The man in khaki's expression turned cold. "I'm afraid that's not an option anymore, Vernon. You've seen too much, learned too much about what we really are. We can't let you leave and tell others about this place. Who would believe me? You'd be surprised how many truckers have started avoiding this stretch of highway after hearing stories from other drivers. We need the occasional new arrival to keep our community alive." The shadowy figures were closing in now, surrounding me in a circle. Their whispers had taken on a more urgent, desperate quality. "Join us willingly, Vernon. Don't make this harder than it has to be. The transformation is easier if you don't resist. Fighting will only cause you pain." I looked around for anything I could use as a weapon, but the restaurant was filled with nothing but lightweight chairs and tables. Even if I could grab something, what good would it do against spirits or ghosts or whatever these things were? That's when I noticed something odd about the windows. From the outside, the truck stop had looked completely dark except for a few security lights. But from inside, the restaurant appeared to be brightly lit. Either the windows were one-way glass, or the light I was seeing wasn't real. It was part of whatever illusion these entities used to lure victims into their trap, which meant maybe other things weren't real either. I walked over to one of the windows and pressed my face against the glass, trying to see outside. At first, all I could make out was darkness and the faint outline of my truck parked near the building, but as my eyes adjusted, I began to see more details. The parking lot wasn't empty after all. There were dozens of trucks out there, old ones, new ones, rigs from every era of trucking. Some looked like they'd been sitting there for years, with weeds growing up around their tires and rust eating away at their chrome. And beyond the trucks, barely visible in the darkness, I could see shapes that might have been human bodies. Lots of them, scattered around the parking lot like discarded mannequins. The physical remains of the truckers, whose spirits were now trapped in this place. "You see them, don't you?" the man in khaki said, appearing beside me at the window. "Our former selves. We don't need those bodies anymore, but we keep them around as reminders of what we used to be." "You're murderers," I said. "We're liberators. We free people from the prison of physical existence and offer them something better. Eternal companionship, infinite time to share stories and experiences, freedom from all the petty concerns that make mortal life such a burden. By killing them, by transforming them. The body dies, yes, but the consciousness lives on, enhanced, purified, connected to something greater than individual existence." I stared out at the graveyard of trucks and drivers, trying to count how many victims there might have been over the years. Dozens, certainly, maybe hundreds. How long has this been going on? "This truck stop has been here in one form or another since the 1960s, the man replied. "We've been recruiting new members for almost as long. The highways of America are full of lonely people, Vernon. People who spend their lives moving from place to place without ever really belonging anywhere. We offer them a home, a prison, a paradise. But I can see you're not ready to appreciate what we're offering. Perhaps you need some time to think it over." The shadowy figures began to move again, but this time they weren't approaching me. They were backing away, creating a clear path toward the rear of the restaurant. "Where are you going?" I asked. "We're giving you space to consider our offer," the man said. "The back room has some comfortable chairs where you can sit and think about your options. There's no rush. We have all the time in the world." I didn't trust this sudden change in their behavior, but I also didn't have much choice. I walked toward the back of the restaurant, the whispers following me like a chorus of damned souls. "Think about it, Vernon. Consider what we're offering. Remember how lonely you've been. Remember how tired you are of being alone." The back room turned out to be a small office area with a few chairs and a desk. There were no windows, and only one door, the one I'd just come through. I sat down in one of the chairs and tried to figure out how to escape from this nightmare. But as the minutes passed, I found myself actually considering their offer. The loneliness of the road really was hard to bear sometimes, and the idea of never being alone again, of having constant companionship and conversation, was more tempting than I wanted to admit. Maybe they were right. Maybe what they were offering really was better than spending the rest of my life driving empty highways, eating meals in silence, sleeping in truck cabs with nothing but the sound of highway traffic for company. After all, what was I going back to? Another load of freight to haul? Another week of solitude broken only by brief interactions with dispatchers and customers who saw me as nothing more than a means of moving their products from one place to another? The whispers seemed to sense my wavering resolve. "You're beginning to understand. We're not your enemies, Vernon. We're offering you salvation, freedom from the emptiness of mortal existence." I closed my eyes and tried to think clearly, but the whispers were getting inside my head, making it harder and harder to remember why I'd been resisting in the first place.
Maybe it was time to stop fighting and accept what they were offering.
Maybe it was time to join them. I must have been sitting in that back room for over an hour, listening to the whispers and feeling my resistance slowly crumble away. The voices were so persistent, so reasonable in their arguments, that it was becoming harder and harder to remember why I'd wanted to leave in the first place. The loneliness of the road really was exhausting. 26 years of it had worn me down in ways I'd never fully admitted to myself. And what did I have to show for it? A decent savings account, sure, but no wife, no kids, no real friends outside of the trucking community. Just an endless cycle of picking up loads, driving across the country, and delivering them to people who barely acknowledged my existence.
Maybe the entities in this place were right. Maybe what they were offering really was better than continuing that empty existence for another 20 or 30 years, until I was too old to drive anymore. Vernon? The voice was different from the others. Not a whisper, but a normal speaking voice with a slight southern accent. Vernon, can you hear me? My name's Marvin, and I need you to listen very carefully. I opened my eyes and looked around the small office, but I was still alone. The voice seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Who's there? I asked. I'm a trucker, same as you. Been driving these roads for 32 years, and I know what you're going through right now. But Vernon, you need to snap out of it. Those things out there, they're not offering you salvation. They're trying to kill you. I can't see you. That's because I'm not in that building with you. I'm parked about a mile down the highway, talking to you through my CB radio. Somehow the signal is getting through to that place, even though it shouldn't be possible. CB radio? But I hadn't seen any CB equipment in the office. Vernon, listen to me. That truck stop you're in. It's been abandoned for 15 years. The building is falling apart. Half the roof is caved in, and the parking lot is full of weeds and broken glass. Whatever you think you're seeing in there, it's not real. But the lights, the restaurant, the people? It's all an illusion, son. Those entities have been trapped in that place for decades, feeding off the life force of truckers who make the mistake of stopping there after dark. They create a fantasy world to lure victims in, make them believe they're being offered companionship and community. The whispers around me suddenly became louder and more agitated. Don't listen to him, Vernon. He's trying to trick you. He wants to keep you lonely and isolated. We're your real friends. But Marvin's voice cut through their words like a knife. Vernon, those whispers you're hearing, they're not from friendly spirits. They're from the souls of truckers who got trapped in that place and couldn't find their way out. They're trying to drag you down with them because misery loves company. How do you know all this? Because I almost got trapped there myself, about 10 years ago. Stopped for fuel one night, started hearing the whispers, saw the same kind of friendly clerk you probably met. But I had my CB radio on, and another driver named Kirk warned me what was happening, told me to get back to my truck and drive away as fast as I could. Kirk. The name struck me as familiar, though I couldn't remember where I might have heard it. The thing is, Vernon, once these entities start working on you, they get inside your head, make you forget why you wanted to leave, make you believe that joining them is what you really want. But it's not. It's just their influence messing with your thoughts. I tried to focus on Marvin's words, but the whispers were getting louder and more insistent. He's lying, Vernon. We would never hurt you. All we want is to end your loneliness. Don't believe the voice on the radio. Stay with us. Become one of us. Vernon, Marvin said urgently, I need you to get up right now and walk back into that restaurant. Don't listen to anything the entities say. Don't look at any illusions they show you. Just focus on my voice and head for the front door. The door is locked. I can't get out. The door isn't locked, son. That's just another illusion. The real door, the door to the actual abandoned building you're in, that door is probably hanging off its hinges.
These entities can mess with your perception, make you see things that aren't there, but they can't actually change the physical world. I stood up from the chair, and immediately the whispers became a chorus of desperate pleas. Don't leave us, Vernon. We need you. Without new friends, we'll fade away. Please don't abandon us. We're so lonely without fresh company. For a moment, I felt a stab of guilt. These entities sounded genuinely desperate, genuinely afraid of being left alone. But then Marvin's voice reminded me of the truth. Vernon, those things aren't lonely spirits looking for friendship. They're parasites that feed on human life force. Every trucker they've recruited over the years is another soul trapped in that place forever, unable to move on to whatever comes after death. Don't let them add you to their collection. I walked to the doorway of the office and looked out at the restaurant. The scene was exactly as I'd left it, brightly lit, clean, with shadowy figures seated at various tables. But now that I was listening to Marvin's words, I could see the cracks in the illusion. The shadows weren't quite right. The lighting didn't match what should have been coming from the fixtures I could see. And the whispers were coming from everywhere at once, not from the specific locations where the shadowy figures appeared to be sitting. It's not real, I said to myself. And as I spoke the words, the illusion seemed to flicker slightly, like a TV with bad reception. That's right, Vernon. Marvin's voice encouraged me. Keep focusing on reality. These entities are powerful, but they're not all powerful. They need you to believe in their illusions for those illusions to work. I started walking toward the front of the restaurant, ignoring the increasingly frantic whispers. Vernon, where are you going? Don't leave us. We can give you everything you've ever wanted. Companionship, friendship, an end to loneliness. Please don't go. The man in khaki appeared in front of me, blocking my path to the door. But now I could see that he wasn't quite solid. I could make out the details of the wall behind him through his translucent form. Vernon, please reconsider, he said, his voice taking on a pleading quality. We're not your enemies. We're offering you a gift that few people ever receive, the chance to escape the limitations of mortal existence and become part of something greater. You're offering me death, I replied, continuing to walk toward him. We're offering you transformation. Freedom from pain, from loneliness, from the endless cycle of work and exhaustion that defines your current existence. By trapping my soul in this place forever. By giving you eternity to explore the depths of consciousness and connection. Vernon, think about what you're walking away from. Imagine never being alone again, never feeling the ache of isolation that comes from spending weeks at a time with no meaningful human contact. His words were still seductive, still playing on my deepest fears and longings. But Marvin's voice kept me grounded. Vernon, don't listen to him. That entity has been practicing those same arguments for decades. He knows exactly what to say to make lonely truckers want to stay. But look around you. Really look. Do those shadows look happy to you? Do they look like they're enjoying their eternal companionship? I looked at the shadowy figures seated around the restaurant. Now that I was paying attention, I could see that they weren't engaged in pleasant conversation or joyful fellowship. They were sitting in isolation, each one trapped in their own space, whispering to themselves or staring blankly into the distance. They looked miserable. They're not companions, I realized. They're prisoners. The man in khaki's friendly expression cracked, revealing something desperate and angry underneath. You don't understand what you're rejecting, Vernon. You think your life on the road has meaning, but what has it really accomplished? You've spent 26 years moving other people's goods from place to place. You've contributed nothing to the world, created nothing of lasting value. At least here, you could be part of something permanent. Maybe not, I said, stepping right through his translucent form. But it would be my life to waste.
The moment I passed through the entity, the entire restaurant seemed to shudder and flicker. The bright lights dimmed, the clean surfaces became dirty and decrepit, and the shadowy figures began to fade. I could see the building as it really was now, abandoned, falling apart, with holes in the walls and debris scattered across the floor. The front door wasn't locked at all. It was hanging open, creaking in the desert wind.
"Vernon," Marvin's voice called urgently. "Get out of there now. They're losing their hold on the illusion, and they're going to be desperate. Desperate entities can be dangerous." I ran for the door as the whispers behind me turned into screams of rage and desperation. "You can't leave. We won't let you go. If we can't have your soul, we'll take your life. No one escapes from this place." The temperature in the building dropped dramatically, and I could feel something pursuing me. Not the man in khaki, but something much darker and more malevolent. The real entity that had been hiding behind all the friendly illusions. I burst through the front door and into the cool desert night. Behind me, I could hear the sound of the building collapsing, though when I turned around, it still appeared to be standing. But now I could see it as it really was. A dilapidated structure with broken windows, a partially collapsed roof, and walls covered in graffiti and desert grime. The parking lot was exactly as Marvin had described it, full of abandoned trucks from different eras, some so old they were barely recognizable as vehicles anymore. Weeds grew up through cracks in the asphalt, and in the moonlight, I could see the pale shapes of human bones scattered among the rusted hulks. My own truck sat near the building, exactly where I'd parked it. It looked completely normal and undamaged, the only clean functioning vehicle in the entire lot. As I ran toward my rig, Marvin's voice crackled through my CB radio, which was still on in my cab. "Vernon, you made it out. How are you feeling?" I climbed into my truck and grabbed the CB handset with shaking hands. "I'm okay, I think. Shaken up, but okay." "Marvin, how did you know to contact me?" "I've been monitoring CB chatter on this stretch of highway for 10 years now, ever since Kirk saved my life by warning me about that place. Every few months, I pick up signals from inside that abandoned truck stop, truckers who've gotten trapped calling for help. Most of the time, I'm too late to do anything. But tonight, I heard your voice and decided to try reaching out." I started my engine, grateful to hear the familiar rumble of my diesel motor. Everything about my truck felt normal and real after the surreal experience in the abandoned building. "What happens to the truckers who don't escape?" I asked. "Their bodies die, usually from exposure or dehydration after a few days trapped in that place. But their souls get added to the collective that maintains the illusion. They become part of the whispers, part of the trap that lures in the next victim." I looked back at the building one more time as I put my truck in gear. In the moonlight, I could see shadowy figures moving behind the broken windows, the trapped souls of truckers who hadn't been as fortunate as I was. "Marvin, why don't the authorities do something about this place?" "What would they do? To anyone who looks at it during the day, it's just an abandoned truck stop. The entities only become active after dark, and they only target lone truckers who are emotionally vulnerable. Plus, who would believe stories about supernatural parasites feeding off the souls of truck drivers?" He had a point. Even I was having trouble accepting what had just happened, and I'd lived through it. I drove back to the on-ramp and merged onto I-40, heading east toward Arkansas. As I picked up speed, I felt the oppressive atmosphere that had been weighing on me all day finally lift. The desert night felt clean and open again, full of possibilities instead of threats. "Vernon," Marvin's voice came through the CB again. "I need to ask you something. During the time you were trapped in that building, did you feel like giving up? Like maybe what they were offering was better than your life on the road?" I thought about it for a moment. Yeah, I did. For a while there, I was seriously considering joining them. The loneliness of trucking. It gets to you sometimes, you know? "I know exactly what you mean.
That's their primary weapon. They identify what makes us vulnerable and exploit it ruthlessly. The loneliness, the isolation, the feeling that our lives don't have much meaning beyond moving freight from one place to another. But you got past it? With help from other drivers like Kirk, and now like me reaching out to you. The thing is, Vernon, we don't have to be as alone as we think we are. There's a whole community of truckers out here who look out for each other, share information, warn each other about dangers on the road. As if to prove his point, other voices began breaking in on the CB frequency. This is Lance eastbound on I-40. Heard some of that conversation. Vernon, glad you made it out okay. Blake here, westbound near Flagstaff. Been driving this route for 12 years, and I always wondered why some trucks just disappeared around that area. Now I know. Garrett checking in from I-10 down south. Vernon, if you need someone to talk to while you're driving tonight, we've got a whole network of drivers who monitor these frequencies. You're not alone out here. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely connected to the trucking community. Not just as individual drivers who happen to share the same profession, but as a brotherhood that looked out for each other in ways that went beyond just sharing information about traffic conditions and fuel prices. Thanks, everyone, I said into the CB handset. I appreciate it more than you know. Over the next several hours, as I drove through New Mexico and into the Texas Panhandle, I had intermittent conversations with various drivers on the radio. Nothing dramatic or profound, just the kind of casual talk that helps pass the time and remind you that you're part of something larger than yourself. By the time the sun came up, I felt better than I had in months. Not just because I'd escaped from a supernatural trap, but because I'd been reminded that the loneliness of the road didn't have to be absolute. There were people out here who cared about each other, who were willing to help a fellow driver in trouble. I delivered my load in Arkansas without any further incidents and began the drive back to Phoenix. But instead of taking I-40 again, I chose a different route. I-44 north through Oklahoma, then I-35 south through Texas. It would add a few hours to my trip, but I wasn't ready to drive past that abandoned truck stop again. Not yet. Maybe someday I'd be able to handle that stretch of highway again. But for now, I was content to take the long way home, knowing that I had friends on the radio to talk to if the isolation started getting to me. Because I'd learned something important during that terrible night in New Mexico. The entities in that abandoned truck stop weren't wrong about the loneliness and isolation that comes with long-haul trucking. Those feelings are real, and they can make drivers vulnerable to all kinds of dangers, both supernatural and mundane. But they were wrong about the solution. The answer wasn't to give up your humanity and join some parasitic collective. The answer was to remember that even on the loneliest stretches of highway, you're part of a community of people who understand what you're going through and are willing to help if you need it. All you have to do is reach for the CB handset and call out into the darkness. Someone will answer. Someone always does. 6 weeks later, I was back on I-40. But this time I wasn't alone. I'd spent those 6 weeks thinking about what had happened at the abandoned truck stop, and I'd come to a disturbing conclusion. I couldn't be the only driver who'd encountered those entities. In fact, based on the number of abandoned trucks I'd seen in that parking lot, there had probably been dozens of victims over the years, which meant there were probably other drivers out there right now who were heading into that same trap, unaware of what was waiting for them. I'd tried reporting the incident to the authorities, but just as Marvin had predicted, no one took it seriously. The New Mexico State Police thanked me for the information, but clearly thought I was either lying or suffering from some kind of breakdown. The Department of Transportation was polite but unhelpful. Even the trucking company I worked for just made a note in my file and suggested I take some time off if the stress of long-haul driving was getting to me, so I decided to handle it myself. I'd convinced another driver named Randolph to ride along with me on this trip, an experienced trucker who'd been hauling freight for over 20 years and wasn't easily spooked. I'd told him some of what had happened,
though I'd left out the more unbelievable details. I just said I'd had a bad experience at a truck stop that I thought other drivers should know about. Now we were approaching that stretch of highway where the abandoned truck stop waited, and I was starting to have second thoughts about the whole plan. "You sure about this, Vernon?" Randolph asked from the passenger seat. "I mean, if this place is as dangerous as you say, maybe we should just report its location to other drivers and let them avoid it." "I've been trying to do that for weeks," I replied. "But most drivers don't believe me. They think it's just another urban legend, like the phantom hitchhiker or the vanishing truck stop that serves the best coffee you've ever tasted but disappears when you try to find it again." "So, what exactly are we planning to do?" I wasn't entirely sure. My vague plan was to document the abandoned truck stop somehow, take photos, maybe shoot some video, gather evidence that would convince other drivers to take the threat seriously. If I could create a warning that people would actually believe, maybe I could prevent other truckers from falling into the same trap I'd barely escaped. "We're going to prove it exists," I said, "and we're going to warn as many drivers as possible to stay away from it." It was about 8 p.m. when we reached the area where the truck stop was located. I'd been monitoring CB Channel 19 for the past hour, listening for any chatter about drivers planning to stop for the night in this area. What I heard made my blood run cold. "Break 19. This is Wade eastbound on I-40 around mile marker 85, looking for a good place to fuel up and grab some dinner. Anyone know of a truck stop coming up?" I grabbed the CB handset immediately. "Wade, this is Vernon. Where exactly are you right now?" "About 10 miles west of Grants, New Mexico. Why?" "Wade, listen to me very carefully. There's an abandoned truck stop about 5 miles ahead of you. It looks like it might be open, but it's not. It's dangerous. Do not stop there under any circumstances." There was a pause, then Wade's voice came back with a chuckle. "Vernon, you talking about that old Flying J? I stopped there a couple times before it closed down. What's dangerous about an abandoned building?" "Wade, just trust me on this. Keep driving until you reach Albuquerque. There are plenty of safe truck stops there." "Thanks for the advice, Vernon, but I'm running low on fuel and I'm tired. If I see a place that looks like I can get some diesel, I'm stopping." I looked at Randolph, who was listening to the conversation with growing concern. "We need to get there before he does," I said, pressing harder on the accelerator. But we were too late. As we crested the hill overlooking the area where the truck stop was located, I could see headlights in the parking lot below. Wade had already pulled off the highway and was walking toward the building. "There," I said, pointing down at the scene. "You see it?" Randolph squinted through the windshield. "I see a truck parked near an old building, but the building looks dark, empty." "That's because it is empty, but Wade doesn't see it that way. To him, it probably looks like it's open for business." I parked my rig at the top of the hill and grabbed a flashlight from my glove compartment. "Randolph, I need you to stay here and monitor the CB radio. If you hear anything strange, or if I don't come back in 30 minutes, call 911. "Vernon, what are you planning to do?" "I'm going to try to warn Wade before it's too late." I climbed down from my truck and started jogging toward the abandoned truck stop. As I got closer, I could hear the familiar sound that had haunted my dreams for weeks. Whispers carried on the desert wind, too faint to understand, but definitely human voices. Wade's truck was parked near the building, its engine still ticking as it cooled down. But Wade himself was nowhere to be seen. I tried the main entrance to the building. The door was hanging open, just as I remembered, but I couldn't see any light coming from inside. "Wade!" I called out. "Wade, can you hear me?" No response. I stepped into the building, playing my flashlight beam across the interior. What I saw was exactly what I expected: a ruined truck stop with debris scattered across the floor, broken windows, and graffiti covering the walls. But I could hear voices coming from deeper in the building. Not whispers this time, but normal conversation. Wade was talking to someone. I followed the sound through the debris-filled restaurant area and toward the back of the building. The voices were coming from what looked like it had once been the manager's office. "Wade?" I called out again. This time I heard a response. "Vernon? What are you doing here?" I found Wade sitting in a chair in the office, apparently having a conversation with empty air. But from his perspective, he was clearly interacting with other people. He was looking at specific spots in the room, responding to questions I couldn't hear, nodding and smiling as if he was enjoying pleasant company. "Wade, we need to leave. Right now." He looked up at me with a confused expression. "Leave? But I just got here. These folks are telling me the most amazing stories about trucking in the old days. Did you know that back in the 70s, there were no speed limits on some highways? And the CB culture was completely different." I could see what was happening. The entities had Wade in their grip, making him believe he was having fascinating conversations with fellow truckers. But from my perspective, he was sitting alone in a ruined office, talking to himself. "Wade, look around you. Really look. What do you see?" "I see a comfortable office with some friendly people who understand what it's like to spend your life on the road." He gestured to empty spaces around the room. "This is Marcus. He's been driving for 30 years. And this is Janet. She hauled freight all over the country back when women truckers were rare. They've got stories that would make your hair curl." The same names the entities had used on me. Marcus, the fake truck stop clerk, and now Janet. Probably another fabricated identity designed to seem trustworthy and familiar. "Wade, those people aren't real. This building has been abandoned for 15 years. You're in danger." "Danger? From what? These are some of the nicest folks I've ever met. Matter of fact, they've invited me to stay here tonight. No charge for parking, and they've got a comfortable place for me to sleep." I could hear the whispers starting again, faint but growing stronger. "Don't listen to him, Wade. He's trying to separate you from your new friends. He doesn't understand what we're offering. Stay with us, Wade. We can give you what you've been looking for." I grabbed Wade by the shoulders and tried to pull him out of the chair. "Wade, I'm not leaving without you. We're getting out of here right now." But Wade resisted, pushing me away. "Vernon, what's gotten into you? These people are just trying to be hospitable and you're being rude." That's when I realized I needed help. I pulled out my CB handset and switched to channel 19. "Break 19, this is Vernon at the abandoned truck stop east of Grants, New Mexico. I have a driver named Wade who's been affected by unusual circumstances. I need any drivers in the area to respond immediately." Marvin's voice came through the radio almost instantly. "Vernon, this is Marvin. I'm about 40 miles east of your position. What's the situation?" "The entities have Wade. He can't see the building as it really is. He thinks he's having conversations with friendly truckers in a comfortable office. I can't get him to leave. Vernon, you need to get out of there yourself." "If those entities realize you're trying to interfere with their hunt, they'll target you next." Other voices began breaking in on the radio. "This is Garrett westbound. Vernon, we've been monitoring your transmissions. There's a whole network of us drivers who know about supernatural dangers on the highways. We're coordinating a response." "Lance here. I'm about 20 miles out. Vernon, whatever you do, don't let those entities know you can see through their illusions." "Blake checking in. Vernon, I've got some equipment that might help. Blessed salt, iron fillings, other things that can disrupt supernatural entities. ETA 15 minutes. I looked at Wade, who was still sitting in the chair, apparently listening to invisible companions. The whispers around me were getting louder and more insistent. "You can't save him, Vernon. He's already ours. Soon you'll join him. Why fight what's inevitable?" But I wasn't giving up. Not on Wade, and not on the idea that this supernatural trap could be stopped permanently. "Marvin," I said into the CB handset, "what would it take to shut this place down for good? To prevent these entities from claiming any more victims?" "I don't know, Vernon. Nobody's ever tried to destroy one of these supernatural anchor points before. Most drivers who encounter them just try to escape and warn others. Well, maybe it's time someone tried something different. Over the next 20 minutes, trucks began arriving at the hilltop where Randolph was waiting. Not just Blake with his supernatural supplies, but 5 other drivers who'd heard the CB chatter and decided to help. By the time they'd all gathered, we had a small convoy of truckers who were ready to face whatever was waiting in that abandoned building. Blake had brought an impressive array of equipment, not just blessed salt, but also iron fillings, silver crosses, wooden stakes, and even a few containers of what he claimed was holy water blessed by priests from different faiths. The thing is, Blake explained as we prepared to enter the building, we don't know exactly what kind of entities we're dealing with. Different supernatural creatures are vulnerable to different things, so we're bringing everything that might work. Garrett had brought something even more valuable: experience. I've encountered similar entities on other highways, he said. The key is to disrupt their connection to their anchor point. If we can break whatever's tethering them to this building, they should be forced to move on. What kind of anchor point? I asked. Could be anything. A grave site, a cursed object, the remains of their original physical forms. We'll have to search the building and find what's keeping them here. As we approached the truck stop, now armed with supernatural weapons and the support of experienced ghost hunters, I felt more confident than I had since this whole ordeal began. But I also knew that we were walking into extreme danger. These entities had been trapping and killing truckers for decades. They weren't going to give up their hunting ground without a fight. And somewhere in that ruined building, Wade was still sitting in that chair, having pleasant conversations with creatures that wanted to add his soul to their collection. We had to save him, and we had to shut down this supernatural trap permanently. The question was whether we'd all survive the attempt.